March 25th, 2009 meeting of the Montecito Planning Commission is to order. Would we all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Ms. Oakland, TV coverage announcement, if you would.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County of Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20, at 9 o'clock a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Santa Maria, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcasts of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays at 5 o'clock p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. And for the roll call, Commissioner Gottsdenker, Commissioner Overall, Commissioner Burrows, Commissioner Phillips.
Here.
And for the record, Commissioner Idelson will be absent today.
Thank you. Ms. Black, the agenda status report.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. This morning we have 4 items on your agenda. Item number 1, standard agenda item number 1, is withdrawn, and I think we just need a motion or acknowledging that withdrawal. And we're ready to move forward on all the other items.
Very good. And a projection report, if any.
Yes, Mr. Chair, your next meeting is scheduled for April 22nd, and you do have a couple of items on that day. Pretty light agenda so far. May 27th is your next projected Planning Commission hearing, and I do believe we'll be having the ordinance amendments for noticing, although they don't show up on your projection report yet. They will be on the May 27th hearing, and we'll see if there are other items. And then the next meeting would be June 24th, and we'll monitor that and see if there's work for the commission to do. We'll have the meeting, and if there isn't, then we'll cancel it. But your meetings are fairly light so far.
I'm relying on that for the entire year, hoping that that's the case.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On that same subject, I'm kind of noticing most of our agendas are pretty light, And given, for me, it's like given the amount of money that it costs to bring us all together and for staff time and for this, I'm just wondering if there's any way of staff, Ms. Black, having a really good hard look. I know we want to be able to serve applicants in a timely manner, and there are state mandates that we get hearings done. But, I would just like to put forward that if it looks like we're going to continue to have like 1 hour, 2 hour hearings, that maybe we could actually state for the public in some way that we're going to go to every other month. I look at today's agenda, and then in a month from now, if these were been combined, it would make way more sense for me as far as time and money to have 1 day of hearings rather than a couple of hours. So I just wanted to put that out there as something that I think that I would like to recommend staff have a look at and see if that could be possibly, if we could be handled in that way.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottsdenker, we can certainly look at that. It's a little bit easier to do when the commissions meet more frequently, and we've been doing that pretty frequently with the County Planning Commission, but they meet 2 or 3 times a month. It's a little bit harder to tell somebody that they need to wait a whole additional month to have their items heard, but I take your point, and we're looking at that.
Public comment. This is a period set aside to allow public testimony on items not on today's agenda. And I have some speaker slips. And let me begin with Susan Petrovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Susan Petrovich, and I'm a frequent visitor here. And I just wanted to bring to the Commission's attention, and hopefully someone else who can do something about this is listening. The audience chairs are once again becoming decrepit. Last time I was here, I tore my suit by sitting on a spring that was sticking up that I didn't see until, of course, I was on top of it. So I'm going to start my campaign, as I did many years ago, to get these replaced and get these, what were once very new and nice chairs. So that is my request and my public comment. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Mr. Thorndike.
Good morning, Chair and Board. I'm John Thorndike of Toro Canyon, and still of Toro Canyon. I want to compliment your organization that's got me into eminent domain status right now for being very prompt and efficient and courteous people. They took care of something I needed this morning already. And that's called the Support Services Division or the Real Estate Division of the General Service Department. I still haven't forgotten General Service. They took 4 of 7 of my vehicles in their day, and I never did get paid for it, but that's okay. I think these people are doing a good job. Now, request to speak, I'm asking, I want to talk on communications, inter and intra-county and state. I think they should be undertaken to minimize misunderstandings and such things as water issues and rulings of the court. They don't get circulated. I had a ruling of the court in hand, gave it to the county, to the assessor's office. It was duly corrected. It was in conformity with the court, but it didn't get circulated throughout all of the county offices, and it has done grievous harm to me. Now the county realizes my water is indispensable to them. My property is indispensable to them if they're going to pick up the U.S. EPA project, which is adjacent to and partially on my property. So they're offering me a offer that does not include water. However, I won a lawsuit that gave me the right to meter that water, but it didn't get circulated. This did not get circulated. And that's that issue. Now, the other issue I want to talk about is, and I don't have it on my card, or I have it only on yours, is we have homelessness, and it's compounding now, and I know that it's not directly in your jurisdiction here, but I'm speaking to the county overall, and I think we ought to address it before it spreads all over, okay? It's really, we're losing 2 big groups. One, the Salvation Army in Carpinteria, and the other downtown here. Thank you very, very much for your time. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Thorndike. Okay, no other public comment. We can now turn to the Planning Commissioner's informational reports. Are there any informational reports to announce? All right.
Yes.
Yes.
I was waiting. Yeah, I just want to bring one issue to the commission. And I think some of those of us who were on the commission last year will remember that there were several subcommittees of work that were done by this commission, and then there were products that produced. One of those very specifically was road encroachments, and this was brought forward by the Montecito Association. We worked on it for approximately a year as a subcommittee. We came up with a number of guidelines that were approved by Public Works. We worked with Public Works on this, and we now appear to have situations in the community in which encroachment permits are being issued that do not comply with those guidelines. And it's interesting that Mr. Thorndike brings up the idea of interdepartmental information, because, I spoke with 3 members from Public Works about the issuance of this encroachment permit. There were a number of complaints from the neighborhood in general about, and we were told, well, Public Works it's our purview, we're going to issue the encroachment permit. And so now we have a situation, obviously I'm talking about in the T-Fire area, of a wall that has been built that takes away probably approximately 3 to 4 feet of the road shoulder, so that, in my opinion, and many people's opinion in the neighborhood, it now creates a dangerous situation. The road shoulders have now been narrowed. There's no place for people to walk where they always used to be able to walk. And so for me, it's kind of like there seems to be a breakdown here about the work that this commission does, and specifically myself, having spent hours coming up with these guidelines, and now we have a department here in the county that doesn't seem to care whether the guidelines were done or are followed. And I'm left with, well, then why do I do the work that I do? Why does this commission do the work that we do if it's not going to be followed by departments in the county outside of planning and development? So that's what I wanted to bring to the commission this morning. And how do we resolve this? I mean, the Montecito Association brings us issues. We deal with them as representing the community, and then we resolve them. We think we've gotten somewhere, and then we have departments that don't seem to want to play the same game that we're playing. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I don't know what Public Works is doing in relationship to the guidelines, but I will assure you that I will talk with Scott McAlpin and have something come back to you at your next meeting.
Ms. Gottstinker, Commissioner, the guidelines, they didn't call for our involvement in this at all, did it?
We developed the guidelines.
No,
a committee of this commission developed those guidelines.
But not a review function?
No, not as a review function, no.
Okay. And in this case,
I think at the time, we avoided having to have those projects be reviewed.
Yeah.
Because that just takes more time and more money and all of that kind of things. And so it really is done as a guideline situation and as a sign-off by Public Works. But the community is not being served by that, which is my concern.
I never did see the result of that committee's work. Is there a neighbor appeal process if the encroachment is?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe there's an appeal process. We did bring the guidelines to the commission after they were developed and approved, and we can bring them back next month and ask Public Works to come and address the commission on the issue if you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
When did that come before the commission?
I would guess about a year ago.
Yeah, I would say about a year ago. Yeah,
I guess I do recall that.
We had a number of committees that we had at that time, Commissioner Burrows, that we were working on, like duplex FARs and, a number of things, and I think we actually completed most of those work projects. I actually myself think that it is time to create some non-work projects with regards to some of the issues in Montecito, specifically basements. But, that's up to us to sit down and figure out what we want to create about that. But we did complete those.
Ms. Black, could we take another look at those and see if they're clear and maybe there's some problem we can cure?
Mr. Chair, yes, we'll bring a copy of the guidelines for each of the commissioners to your next meeting and ask Public Works staff to be here as well.
Great.
I recall they were fairly clear. I mean, I think that was the intent.
That's the whole point. They're very clear, but they're not being followed.
And then we have another issue.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner. Excellent point.
There is one other thing. There's just one other thing that I would, just as a general announcement, the T-Fire Relief Center that the county has very generously donated for the use of the community and county officials, is actually closing on Wednesday, April 1st. And we will be having a little reception that day. And so I'd just like to announce that and invite anybody in the public, and also invite my fellow commissioners to attend.
At Cold Spring School?
Yes, it's at Cold Spring School, and where there'll be a little award ceremony and a little reception following, and, it's just to kind of bring a close to that activity at this point.
Excellent, thank you. The divisional briefing, Westmont College, is on the agenda next. Mr. Tuttle, good to see you again. You're fully recovered, I hope?
Getting there. Mr. Chair, members of the commission, thanks for having me this morning. I am pleased to announce that after our meeting our briefing last month, that the traffic counter collection is back up and running, and those are provided for as information to the public and on Westmont's website. Just to let you know where we stand with those, through February of this year, the average semester weekday counts, cumulative average, since the beginning of construction is 2,883 trips. If you recall, the limit during construction was 3,718 trips. So we're about 900 average daily trips below what was put in place as the maximum on our cumulative average. On all other days, meaning weekends and holidays, we're at around 1,260 average daily trips, and the cap was 2,650. So we're about half of those trips for that. And those will continue to be counted on a monthly basis. Just to give you an update on where we are with the project, in the last month there were several days of rainy events where they had to shut down, so that did cause some delays in clearing out of ponded water in places of construction. The lower road off the entrance from Cold Spring Road is mostly completed. The middle road, they're waterproofing the retaining wall berm and working on completing that section of the roadway as well. The upper road portion around the northern portion of the campus, they're still working on installing the utilities, and that section hasn't been paved yet. The central plant and observatory are starting to take shape. The central plant, they've put in some masonry walls, and they're starting to install the roof level masonry. On the observatory, they're continuing installation of the structural steel that's providing the support for the structure, as well as the radius stairs that go along the outside and the steel decking. For Winter Hall and Adams, those are a bit further behind in terms of their scheduling. But for Winter Hall, they have completed the mask excavation for the foundation, and they are working on installing the plumbing lines and doing the concrete pours for the foundation. For Adams Hall, it's a few weeks behind that. They're still working on the mask excavation, and they're just now beginning to do some of the concrete pours. And if you recall, with the concrete pours, those are situations where once they start, they can't stop. Yes. And so there are times when the concrete pours have resulted in extending the construction hours beyond our 4 o'clock restriction, because trying to finish things up. I'd say that's happened on a handful of occasions, but in all situations they are finished by about 4:30 or 5 o'clock.
Mr. Tuttle, would you, it seems to me the impact on Cold Spring School might be significant during these concrete pour times, and is there a way to give Brian McCabe a heads up as to when they're coming? He has an option of loading and unloading in the back of the school that he's trying to avoid because of neighbor impact, but on those days that may solve a problem for him. Would that be appropriate for you to interface with him?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission.
He's the superintendent principal of Cold Spring.
What I will do is speak with contractors, Matt Malchiori, to get their construction schedule on the concrete pours for over the next month, which is when the bulk of them will occur for those two large buildings, and see if he can pass that along to the superintendent for his information.
Thank you.
The only really other thing to report is there are a number of little pocket parking lots sort of near the southern portion of the campus, near the new entrance to Cold Spring that are also taking shape. They are putting in permeable concrete in many of these parking areas. That is somewhat new to them, but they are working with that, and so far they are passing inspection on those. And the track and infield, or baseball field, they have installed the new scoreboard. That's been completed. And with the otherwise, they're just the track field is mainly used for parking vehicles at the moment, and they haven't started doing much work with that. And that's about where we are today.
Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. Very helpful. Commissioner Gottsnecker.
Yes, Mr. Tuttle, I remember at the time when this was approved, there was a sort of a hotline put in place for complaints so that neighbors could file their complaints either with you or with Westmont. Do we know if there's been any complaints from the neighbors? Have there been complaints to the county or to that hotline?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Gottsnecker, I don't know if there have been complaints through the hotline. I do know that I've received a number of complaints.
You have?
Mm-hmm. I personally have received a number of complaints, probably in the order of 7 to 10, mostly having to do with pre-7 a.m. Starting up with work or post-4 p.m. Work. That has happened on a number of occasions, including last Thursday, I believe, was the most recent one. Prior to last Thursday, there had been about a month of no complaints, so that was good news. For the most part, they've been pretty minor occurrences, but and not a continued pattern of abuse. And our monitors who are on site every day overseeing the construction site have done a good job of getting on top of those types of occurrences when they do occur. There was also a couple instances of some dust issues when we had some real dry, windy conditions in January that have since been resolved, as far as I know, to the satisfaction of the neighbors.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuttle. The minutes of our February 25th meeting, if we could direct our attention, and I'm looking for a motion to approve or amend.
Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the minutes of the last meeting.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Second, Commissioner Gottsnecker. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Passes unanimously. Approved minutes of February 25th, 2009. Director's report and Board of Supervisor hearing summary. Is this Mr. Baker?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Good morning, sir.
We have nothing to report in terms of items coming to the board from Montecito. Maybe that's a reflection, as Commissioner Gottsnecker was talking about, the amount of items that are appearing on the agenda. And that's an indication of activity. I mean, there's probably, I would guess, maybe if you want to call it a per capita basis, we might have more things happening in Montecito than anywhere else in the county. But even Montecito, we've had some diminishing of our applications. We still continue to work very closely with a lot of people out of the T fire area, and that's going very well, I think. And I've heard nothing but compliments of what we've had from staff, as we continue to pay attention to any and all issues that people may have up there coming out of those that were the victims of the T fire, and some of those that were on the outskirts, which were not necessarily people that we had as our case managers looking at, but issues that were people that were next door to some things, and so we're dealing with those.
There was a preliminary approval granted at MBAR last night, I think, on the Pele structure. I think that may be the first we've seen get that far, and it was done quickly and efficiently. Yeah.
Well, Diane can give you the exact numbers of applications that we've received, and we've had some that are moving forward.
Mhm.
I think, not counting the one that you're talking about last night, there's one that is moving forward, essentially have gotten their permits and are ready to proceed with construction.
Mhm.
So it's a slow process for a number of the people. I mean, we've found that there's some that are still, have issues with their insurance companies. So, I mean, that's, I'm sure, going to go on for a while with for some of the people, and that's unfortunate. But we'll move them as fast as we can, and I think we've done an excellent job of that. We were scheduled to be talking about our budget yesterday at the Board of Supervisors. It's now been put off till the 21st. So I'm just alerting people, if they want to get a picture of a lot of the things in the county, not just planning and development, but particularly planning and development. We will be making a presentation on the 21st, and they've guaranteed that we're going to be able to do it. I mean, it's been put off twice now, so they're kind of holding that meeting just for budget items so that the public will get a sense of what's really going on with the county's budget. It's not a pretty picture. And if you look at the counties up and down the state, and cities up and down the state, there are numerous people and numerous agencies out there that are suffering because of what's happened with the economy. So we all hope that stimulus and everything that's going on in Washington starts a turnaround. And with that, that's all I've got to report today.
So there's little expectation for a raise for the Planning Commission here, I guess. Yeah.
I understood that they were going to give you 100% raise.
Oh, good. Yeah. See, 0 and 100%. That works perfectly. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Where are we here? Consent agenda items. Do we have one? We have a consent item, don't we, Ms. Black?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chair. And I guess I would ask if any of the commissioners wanted to pull this item from the consent agenda. If not, then I think you can simply ask if there's anybody here from the public to speak on it.
I don't know that I want to pull it as such, but I do have a question related to it.
Then you're pulling it.
Okay.
That's what you have to do. You vote or pull it.
And then I want to pull it long enough to ask a question.
Okay. Why don't we have Ms. Oplin read it into the record first and then take your question.
The following is the hearing on the request of Tom Mosby, Montecito Water District General Manager, to consider case number 09GOV4, application filed on February 25th, 2009, for a determination that the relocation of a Montecito Water District water line and associated easement is consistent with the comprehensive plan of the County of Santa Barbara pursuant to Government Code Section 65402C.
Now I can ask the question. I was curious as to why the High Line was located above ground rather than underground as it is in most of the rest of that sweep across the foothill there.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, overall, that's an interesting question that I'm not sure I'm prepared to answer. The Montecito Water District has decided on its construction methodology and techniques, and I do believe that one of the reasons it could be above ground in this area is to minimize grading in this very steep area of Montecito.
Actually, my only thought on it was just quite the opposite. In order to construct the walls to house it, it seemed like perhaps they were having to do more grading than they would if they had just trenched and buried it. So I'm not desirous of holding this up, but I would like to understand at some future point if you could give us a report as to why.
Be happy to do that for you.
Mr. Chair, the project description actually from Mr. Mosby somewhat addresses that, and he indicates it's to minimize earthwork and to facilitate district access to the relocated pipeline. So it sounds like it's kind of dual purpose.
Well, I think Commissioner Overall raises an interesting question. And it may be something that we should be involved with. The visual result of these projects impacts the community and the neighbors. Before this goes forward, could we have is there a discussion we should have with Mr. Mosby or some explanation as to why this shouldn't be buried like most water mains? Or?
sense, Ms. Alme, how we could approach this?
Mr. Chair, this is a special district requesting a consistency determination from your commission. They have provided aesthetic relief to the walls by proposing sandstone along, facing. There is a 40-day turnaround limit on these kinds of 65402 projects, and they're basically established so that your commission can look at the operations of a special district and decide to report to the Board of Supervisors as to whether or not the project is consistent with our policies. So there is a deadline on this, and we do need to meet that. That might preclude, it would definitely preclude having a discussion with Mr. Mosby at your next hearing.
Just let me recognize you first. Is there a way to, so we have to take action on this right now?
Mr. Chair, yes, you do.
Okay. Chairman over, Commissioner overall. Chairman overall.
I would simply make a request that we continue this item for a matter of half an hour, let you make a call to Mr. Mosby and see if you could get us an answer. If you can't, then we take an action absent that input.
Why don't we just continue it to the end of the agenda?
Well,
Yeah.
whatever, a convenient time when you have come back with an answer.
Be very happy to do that for you.
And I guess the issue is it feasible to underground it? And, yeah, that's it. Okay. Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Petrovich, are you you want to speak on this issue? I'm sorry?
I can answer your question.
You don't have a speaker slip,
I didn't
but
have
we'll
a
get one
speaker
later.
slip,
Maybe.
but I can certainly put one in.
Ms. Petrovich, please, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, Susan Petrovich. I am familiar with this project. I represent the adjacent property owner. And the issue here was twofold. First, burying it because the pipeline is, its new location is in bedrock, both north of it and under it. That would require quite a bit of additional work for them to bury it. And then when they went to maintain it, and there's going to be a house south of it. So you won't be able to see the wall at all because of the house. The wall is going to be behind the house. And just north of it, as I say, is a steep cliff. So there's nobody above it to see it, and there's no one below it to see it. And the second issue is maintenance. It's kind of tight in there, and so Tom Mosby came up with this idea that they could put a crane in the middle of the auto court for the house that's being planned, and they designed the house accordingly, so that they can then just lift pipe sections in and out. So it's actually much less intrusive, both in the short term and the long term, to put it above ground.
And your client was uniquely impacted? Is that your testimony?
Well, they're building they're building the house in front.
But
so
only they can see it? Is that what you're talking?
Yes.
And they're comfortable with us?
They've consented to it. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
bedrock's a good reason. And-
Well, yeah, it
Yeah.
makes for a lot more work,
Yeah.
earthwork.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. One second. Any questions of Ms. Petrovich?
I don't think so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner overall, should we continue, move on this right now, or should?
I'd still like to get an answer from Mr. Mosby. I have the High Line running through my property. It's underneath my driveway. It had to be done through bedrock, so I'm familiar with some of the issues. I'd like to hear what he has to say, that's all.
Chairman, Commissioners, I will do that investigation and report back to you at the end of Mr. Langle's.
So we'll table this until the end of the day.
Item,
I
yes.
had one question.
Commissioner?
I don't see any other public comments on this. Were there any?
There have been no comments received on this.
Very good.
And, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Sort of in a generic sense, this is something probably that this commission may want to take up down the line at the fact that all of Montecito operates inside of special districts as far as its infrastructure is concerned. The county doesn't really have, they're independent. They have their own boards, they make their own decisions. We don't, as the county, we don't really have a lot of impact on the review process just because of the logistics of way that it all works in Montecito. And for me, I see this as being somewhat of a problem for planning because, and I mean, you're going to see the reason people in the T-Fire area are slow coming in with their permits is because there needs to be major infrastructure work done. And the infrastructure work that needs to be done financially is going to be up to the T-Fire people because the special districts are saying, no, we're not doing anything up there. I mean, we have a hillside of people above Mountain Drive who are going to be installing major infrastructure projects that are going to have to meet the general, our community plan policies and all of these things, because it's individuals doing it where the special districts wouldn't have to meet the same policies, i.e., what Mr. Overall is pointing to. So there's kind of a disconnect between planning, issuing permits, issuing land use permits, and being able to make any requests or demands of the special districts. And it's showing up as being a major problem, I mean, personally, as I can't get Montecito water on my property. I can't get it. Because Montecito Water District has never been required to put in the pumping stations, put in the pipelines, do anything they knew to do to service anything above Mountain Drive. So we're having to do our own, and, when I went in to talk about getting grading permits, it was, no, you can't grade on slopes of greater than 40%. So what's one to do? I mean, planning and development says, no, there's a rule that says you can't grade. The Montecito Water District says, no, that's not we don't have to deliver water to you. There's no requirement for us to deliver water to you. So then as an applicant, and as I said prior to the meeting, it's very interesting for me to find myself on the other side of the table with some of these issues and what it really is like for the applicants. And I don't know, I just see this as being kind of, as I said, a disconnect between what we at the county are doing, and I'm putting myself as part of that now, and managing what the special districts can and can't do and what they will and will do inside of the planning process. So it's another thing that I'd just like to put on the table for later. I mean, it's not going to get fixed right now, but I think it's something that this commission really should take a look at in one of these days when we really have some light agendas as a future project.
Commissioner, you raised this last month, and I was shocked to hear what you said, and I've been thinking about it all month. At some point, I sure like to know why water isn't being provided to that community. And if there's anything this commission can do about it, we should start looking at it.
Yeah, given that we're the one that are granting the land use permits.
Yeah. Commissioner Burrows.
I was just going to say, I think there are some important issues before us in the area of water. But for the purpose of this hearing, it might be better to use our time to address the issue before us, understanding that there are very complex and broad-reaching issues that we can address another time in another way.
Ms. Black, let me ask you for direction. How could we better discuss this at another time in another way?
Mr. Chair, you could invite Mr. Mosby to come and speak to you on behalf of the Montecito Water District and ask what their plans are and how they make decisions about areas that they serve. So you could do that. We could
Is
have
it
a
the
workshop.
sense of the commission that we would like to speak to Mr. Mosby next month?
And maybe what we could do is define the problem for him so that he has the information to address the issues before us. In regard to the T-Fire area, I'm interested in knowing how long it has been that the Montecito Water District does not serve there, and if there is a reason and the issues behind that Ms. Godstanger brought up.
Mr. Overall.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Black, it seems to me that the issue that was raised not related to the agenda item, but in the broader scope, has to do with infrastructure. And I think it would be obviously informative to hear from the Montecito Water District, but I'm not sure that that in of itself meets the need to understand the role of special districts and how it interfaces with planning and development and decisions we might make. So it seems to me that the agenda perhaps ought to be broader than just the water district. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what Commissioner.
No, actually, you interpreted me absolutely accurately, Commissioner Overall. That's what I'm pointing to.
Could your staff also give us a primer on how all this works?
Mr. Chair, we can certainly do that. I'm not sure we can do that next month.
Okay. Commissioner Gottsdenker, is this something?
No, this is for the future. I mean, this is just something that I see as something that needs to be looked at inside the long-term planning process of how planning and development relates to Montecito and the special districts. I mean, because it isn't just, as Mr. Overall said, it's not, we have no sewers up there, so we're all on septic systems, so, we're not served by the sewer district, we're not served by Montecito Water District as far as, and even Montecito Fire District has a little problem because they have the requirements that they make, but they can't demand that Montecito Water District give them the ability to deliver the water that they need for firefighting. So it's kind of, I mean, it's just kind of it's just not working, and it's been something that people have known not's working, and it's the T-Fire that's kind of really brought it to the forefront, for me and for other people, it's like,
Yes.
okay, if you've got a septic system that doesn't work and it can't be approved at this point, but you can't hook on to the sewer because there's no sewer line because the sewer district doesn't deliver service, then you're faced with having to put in and go to extraordinary financial hardships to put in new septic systems. So it's just kind of, I just see it as a planning issue for the future that sometime in this year that I would request that this commission take up because we're the ones that ultimately oversee the granting of the permits.
Well, yeah, at least we should know what the situation is. Yeah. Commissioner.
This is going to show up
Thank you.
later on in other areas in Montecito. I'm not bringing this just because it's my neighborhood. I'm bringing it because I think it's an overall problem within Montecito.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Burrows.
Yes. In defining the purpose or the scope of our hearing on this issue, it would seem to me that considering that the special districts are each a legally established entity responsible to their directors and that kind of thing, the question that I have is what oversight or review does the county have over the special districts in Montecito, and what oversight or review responsibilities does this commission have for those? If there is none, then it seems to me that it should be informational and certainly no action on our part.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Burrows, the county essentially has no oversight over special districts. What you're doing today is about as much as we do in terms of special district reviews. And it's really advisory to the board of directors of the special districts if they disagree with the general plan consistency or determine that they want to move forward with the project despite the inconsistency, they can do so by a supermajority vote of their board, I believe. LAFCO does have a role in special districts, and that may be something that we want to consider in developing this briefing before your commission, but it really isn't an issue that the county exerts much control over or has much control over.
Commissioner.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Is it me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Might it be a better use of our time and more informative to the public if we invited each special district before us and maybe an an overview hearing of the special districts of Montecito so that we better understand their duties and responsibilities and how we might interact with them a little bit better. And also understanding a little bit about LAFCO. Perhaps we could invite the chair of LAFCO before us to again discuss the special districts and what relationship or overview the county and the commission has. Because there's no time, it doesn't seem a good use of our time to spend a day or a morning discussing an issue over which we have no impact at all.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, I think you have an advantage that probably the rest of the county doesn't have when you start talking about this. All these folks that are on these boards live in Montecito. So I think maybe there's some ability for peer pressure, I'll use that word, to bring about maybe some modifications in the way they do business. But Diane is exactly right, that we have no control over them. And I didn't know the piece, but she said a supermajority. If that is the case, that they can take your substantial conformity determination if you deny it and overrule it by a supermajority vote. It really tells you we have no power over them. So I would suggest that maybe some communication with their executives and then from there into their board members is the way to bring about some information and maybe change.
Mr. Oberon.
I'd just like to make a suggestion. We have in the past established working groups. Claire mentioned, Commissioner Gottstanker mentioned one earlier related to encroachment, setbacks, those kinds of things. Right away. That's what word I was looking for. I think we might be better off if we were to establish a small working group to meet with the people from the different special districts, gather some information. I think calling them here, asking them to make public statements, on television and all that before we've gathered enough information to make intelligent comments, ask intelligent questions might be a little bit premature. So my suggestion would be that we established a two-commissioner work group to go gather some information and go from there.
And then report to us as a group.
Yeah. And then we can take it the next step if it seems like it's warranted.
Commissioner Burrows.
Thank you. That's certainly one way to go, Jack, but it seems to me that we might be better served and better serve the purpose would be maybe to have an open workshop, invite the people here so that so Montecito is receiving this information directly from the special districts. Otherwise, maybe a forum with the Montecito Association to actually invite all of the special districts. I've been in Montecito 40 years, and I don't really know how many special districts there are. I know the obvious ones, but these people are doing a lot of good work for us, and maybe we better need to better understand their responsibilities.
Thank you, Ms. Burrows. I tend to think that a two-person committee to at least provide an overview might be a good step, and then implement what you're saying, so we have some intelligent questions to ask.
Yeah,
but we should do it quickly, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because then at least a subcommittee, if whatever we call our little committees, could at least flush out and identify what the problems are, before we actually, voice our personal opinions as to what in an open workshop. At least if we could identify the problems, then set up a workshop to address those specific problems and the breakdowns with that.
Ms. Black.
Mr. Chair, I've heard several ideas raised up on the dais, and if what you're proposing to do is to meet with the special districts and then hold a public forum through the Montecito Association, you may want to have somebody from the association work with you as well. And I don't know if that's something the association's willing to take on. Maybe we can ask them
As part of
that
this initial committee group, or?
No,
No,
I
later?
think what somebody had said, and I think maybe it was Commissioner Burrows, was perhaps the Montecito Association would want to host a forum with the special districts rather than having it a planning commission workshop.
I think that would work as well. Any sense of that?
Yeah, I think either of those methods would work, but I do think it still needs to return to us because ultimately we are the planners. I mean, there's the plan, P&D, P&D issues the land use permits based on whether someone has water, whether someone has fire protection, whether somebody has sanitation. We, at this commission, set the rules. We create the land use policies. These policies are based on the ordinances that requires property owners to do X, Y, and Z. So for me, it really becomes a planning issue, not just a community issue. Because we have to be able to say that the planning department has to be able to say, yes, there's water, there's fire, and there's sanitation on those sites, anywhere in Montecito, And yet, as we can hear, planning and development can't go to any of those special districts and say, well, your infrastructure needs to be improved so that we can actually issue land use permits. I mean, it's just, it's all kind of, a little messy, the way it
Absolutely.
works in Montecito. And I'm just trying to
excellent
see
point.
if there's anything that we can do with some background knowledge to kind of clean it up and make it work a little bit better.
Excellent. Let's take a first step and form a committee to report back at the next hearing. And Commissioner Gostinker, do you have too much to do in your life?
Yes.
You do. Commissioner Burrows, would you be willing to do that? Commissioner Overall? Yeah.
I would think that someone that we ought to use the talent of, and he's not here to speak for himself, but
Dan Idelson,
Commissioner Idelson has been on the boards of virtually every special district.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a wasted opportunity if we didn't include him in that, so.
Commissioner Idelson, if you're watching, call in quickly because we're and object because we're signing you up. Very good. Let the record reflect that we're forming a committee to look into special district jurisdictions and authority and the impact on at least this group, and that Commissioner Burrows and we hope Commissioner Idelson will be involved, and we'll be hearing from you in a month. Yes. Very good. Thank you. Okay, our agenda items. The stone map modification is up next. Would you like to prepare for that? Would you like a minute or two?
Mr. Chairman, I do not think we actually took a vote to withdraw item 1 from the agenda. It was suggested that
Very
we
good.
needed to do that,
do.
and so I move that we withdraw item 1 from the standard agenda.
Second?
All in favor?
I don't understand the motion.
We're recognizing the withdrawal of the, is it Misfelt appeal?
Yes. Yes.
Are we on the consent item?
No, this
No.
was an agenda item that we're not
Yes,
seeing.
I understand.
Before we begin, can I have disclosure as to site visits?
Mr. Chair, did you actually vote on that motion to acknowledge?
All in
withdrawal?
favor of recognizing the withdrawal? Aye. All opposed? Carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
did we take care of the consent item so that we're going to consider that at the end of the agenda?
We're trailing it to the end of the day. Site visits on the stone agenda item. Has anyone been there?
I have visited the site on 3 occasions.
Yeah, I have visited the site.
I visited the site.
And I did as well. Very good. We are ready to go when you are. Do you want, Commissioners, do you want a break for 5 minutes? Is that all right? We're going to step aside for 5 minutes. We'll be back. Convened. Is that what we are? Reconvened? And we have item number 2, and Secretary Oakland, if you would read the item into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of Bob Easton, AIA, agent for the owners Fiona and Douglas Stone, to consider case number 08RMM5, application filed on August 26, 2008, and to accept the exemption for disapproval pursuant to Section 15270 of the state guidelines for implementation of CEQA.
Thank you, Ms. Opland. For the record, I asked all the commissioners, out of order, I suppose, earlier as to site visits, and we have all been to the property. Staff presentation.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. The project before you today is the stone recorded map modification. I would like to correct the date from the header on attachment B of your staff report, which is incorrectly shown as February 27th, 2009, to June 7th, 1999. I would also like to submit into the record an arborist report submitted by the applicant assessing the impacts of proposed vegetation under the on-site oak trees. I will cover the details of that in my presentation.
That report is in our staff report, is in the
I've
your
not
report?
just submitted it.
This is a new one?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Chair, one page.
Okay, we need to read that.
Presentation this morning will be in 3 segments. The first segment will cover the original map and associated conditions. The second will cover the map modification for which a motion is requested today. The third segment will cover background and screening, for which we will be soliciting input from the Montecito Planning Commission on the adequacy of the proposed landscape screening. The project is located at 660 Stonehouse Lane. First, we are going to review the parcel history to provide a context for the project. The parcel is Lot 1 of Cross Creek Ranch 2, as approved by the Planning Commission on September 1st, 1999. An ND was prepared, which included as attachment B of your staff report. Mitigation measures included prohibiting ground disturbance outside the building envelopes and access corridors in order to prevent impacts to on-site oak trees. The area outside the building envelopes and the access utility corridors is shown in blue on this figure. For the second part of our presentation, we will move on to the recorded map modification request. The applicant is requesting a modification to the map in order to allow grading associated with a pool, cabana, and utilities outside the building envelope. As the pool and cabana are proposed directly on the building envelope line, a modification is necessary to legally allow over-excavation and compaction of earth outside the building envelope. The area in light blue is where the compaction would take place. It is possible to complete the project in the proposed location through the use of caissons or alternative foundation systems. However, the applicant is proposing a traditional foundation system at this point. The Montecito Community Plan contains policies which require the protection of oak and specimen trees to the maximum extent feasible, and these policies are shown. This graphic shows the oak tree critical root zones in relation to the proposed work and was taken from the applicant's arborist report and tree protection plan, which is included as attachment D of your staff report. Regardless of the arborist's conclusion that the impacts to oaks from construction can be mitigated, encroachment into this area would not constitute the protection to the maximum extent feasible as required under the Montecito Community Plan. Staff is recommending denial of the project based on the inability to make the change in circumstance findings. Oaks are an important and protected resource under the Montecito Community Plan, and allowing grading outside the envelope would result in potential impacts to oak trees the building envelopes were created to protect. Neighborhood compatibility is one basis for approving maps in any area, particularly in Montecito where the community is reaching build-out under the community plan. Providing the oak trees maximum protection also goes towards maintaining screening between the project site and the neighboring property to the west. Protecting the screening promotes neighborhood compatibility. With regard to the recorded map modification component of the project, staff's recommendation is to adopt the required findings for denial of the project, including the CEQA findings, and deny the project. Now I will be presenting the final segment of the presentation, project background and screening. Staff is seeking input only from the Planning Commission regarding the screening and location of the cabana. Your direction will be provided to the MBAR. An LUP for the resident was approved by the MBAR on November 3, 2006, with an LUP issued on April 27, 2007. Construction commenced after a pre-construction meeting on May 10, 2007. The MBAR did not specifically place a condition that the avocado trees along the southwest property line were to remain. However, the MBAR approved plans stated that avocado trees were to remain. The land use permit only allowed the removal of avocado trees within the building envelope. An LUP for the cabana was submitted on June 27, 2007. The project had received positive conceptual comments from the MBAR on July 7, 2007. After the removal of the mature screening in May of 2008, the 3 subsequent MBAR meetings focused on screening and siting with regard to privacy. Please see Attachment C of the staff report for more details on the MBAR minutes. The screening solution is further complicated by the 3 oak trees along the western property line and any potential impacts associated with oak tree incompatible landscaping. A pool was excavated and several mature avocado trees were removed with the tractor in May of 2008 without the benefit of permits. The grading violation resulting from the unpermitted grading and tree removal was abated by filling the resulting cavities. A zoning violation was opened in December to address the need for replacement screening associated with the removal of the mature vegetation. This photo was taken in 2006 prior to the removal of any avocado trees. As you can see, there was dense vegetation between the building envelope line and property line along the southwest corner of the parcel. This photo was taken in 2008 after the tree removal. You can see how much vegetation was removed along the shared property line. Please let me know if you would like me to go back to the previous slide.
If you would do that quickly, it would be helpful.
This slide shows the screening prior to the tree removal, as seen from the neighboring property to the west. This photo was taken in approximately the same location in February of 2009 after the tree removal. This is the latest landscape plan the applicant is proposing. This has not been reviewed by the MBAR. The project calls for a mixture of avocado trees supported by a pittosporum hedge. An arborist report has been submitted into the record today evaluating the impacts of planting and irrigating a pittosporum hedge under the oak tree critical root zones. The arborist report recommends certain limitations on irrigation of the pittosporum in order to protect the health of the oak trees. The staff recommendation is to adopt the required findings for denial of the project specified in Attachment A of the staff report, including the CEQA findings, deny the project, and to provide comments and input on the adequacy of the proposed screening. Thank you, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bradbury. Commissioners, are there questions of Ms. Bradbury? Very good. The applicant's presentation. Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair and fellow commissioners, my name is Douglas Stone, and I, together with my wife Fiona, own the property commonly known as 660 Stonehouse Lane. I was unaware that you had all gone to the site. I appreciate you taking the time to do that to see what we're talking about firsthand. We come before you today with respect to 3 distinct matters that have all become intertwined. Those 3 issues are, first, we are requesting a recorded map modification which relates specifically to the ability to over-excavate and recompact the soil around a proposed cabana and covered barbecue area. Although Susan Petrovich has taken issue with the term cabana, since the county has chosen to use that term, I'm going to use the term cabana. The second thing we're here about is a pending land use permit application relating to the pool and cabana. And the third is that the county has determined that there was a zoning violation which occurred in relation to the land use permit on the house. I would like to discuss each of these matters, but I'd like to do it in the reverse order. First, the zoning violation. 3 years ago, when my wife and I purchased the lot on which we are building our home, we wanted to not only build a home that we wanted to spend the rest of our lives in, but we wanted to join a community. We had spent enough time in the Montecito area that we recognized this was a place we wanted to call home. We felt that in order to come into the community in a way that was in keeping with the community, we would hire local people. As you know, we chose Bob Easton, a local architect, to design the home, and we chose Willard Bronson and Bill Sparrow as our project managers, and Bill Chappell as our construction supervisor. I don't know whether you know these gentlemen, but we are informed that they have over 100 years of construction experience in the Santa Barbara County area. We put our trust in these professionals. In designing the home and landscaping, we attempted to take into consideration the neighborhood and the environment. We sought and received the approval of Steve Decker, our neighbor to the south, whose house is quite close to our property line. We received a request from another neighbor for some additional screening, which request we agreed to without hesitation. We received no other comments or concerns from anyone. We heard nothing from the Sipples in any respect, and accordingly did not know that they had any concerns about the project or the screening related thereto. Nevertheless, we always plan on providing screening for our own privacy and to respect our neighbors. On the plans as submitted and approved in connection with the House LUP, there were several avocado trees outside the building envelope in the southwest corner, which we left on the plans. We had not yet decided what landscaping we were going to do around various aspects of the house, and as the LUP conditions of approval stated that we could do landscaping outside the building envelope, we were not really concerned at that point with what exactly would be there for screening. This understanding was in large part due to the fact that although there was a general restriction on ground disturbance outside the building envelope, there were express terms which allowed that we could cause ground disturbance for, among other things, landscaping. To us, removal, replacement, and trimming of trees was, and is today, landscaping. To us, any other reading would mean that we'd have to leave dead trees in place, something that I'm confident the county and Jim Langhorne at the Montecito Fire District would object to. I think it is important that the commissioners understand why the 3 avocados in question were removed at the time they were removed. Our land is essentially an alluvial plain from runoff from Romero Creek. The soil is full of boulders of varying sizes and is not fit for construction without proper remedial measures. We were advised that the best way to build a pool and cabana was to over-excavate and recompact the soil. Now, a year ago, I had no idea what those terms meant. And in the event that the commissioners don't know, please allow me just to explain my understanding of what those terms mean. A large excavator is used to dig a hole larger than the hole you actually need for construction. You remove all the subterranean rocks and boulders in the area. You then refill the hole with dirt and small cobble, compacting it per the specifications of a soils engineer and under his review. This process allows for a proper base upon which you place your structures, greatly reducing the chance of differential settlement. Knowing we had a pending land use permit for the pool and cabana, to which there had been no objection, we were approached by our contractor about doing an over-excavation and recompaction. There was at the time on site a large excavator, and the operator of the excavator had time to do it. We were told this kind of excavation, where the soil is recompacted and the earth is returned to its original elevation, is done regularly. My wife and I trusted our professionals and their 100 years of experience. Unfortunately for all concerned, the county has determined that they were wrong. That said, these individuals work for us, and we understand the ultimate responsibility rests with us. But it is extremely important that this commission know that our actions were taken in good faith and with no intent to deceive or injure anyone. In fact, when the first inspector came to the site at the Sipples' request, he had no concern with what was happening. He understood that the intent was to recompact and bring the elevation right back to what it had been. I need to stress to the commission, we were not digging a pool. The county has said we were digging a pool. We were not. We were excavating and recompacting. We would never have begun construction on the pool without a land use permit and a grading permit. We were informed by the professionals we had hired on this job that what we were doing was in complete compliance with a land use permit and all the rules and regulations of the county. It was only when the second inspector, the compliance officer, came out to the site that a concern was raised and the compliance officer issued a stop work order. We complied immediately. Since that time, we have worked with representatives of the Planning and Development Department to remedy the situation. We have complied with each and every request of the county. The county expressed appreciation several times for how we have been handling the matter. Interestingly, there was no immediate discussion about a zoning violation. The prosecution of a zoning violation only commenced once Susan Petrovich became involved and pushed the county in that direction. Where can we go from here? The Sipples want their screening back so they can regain their privacy. We believe they are absolutely entitled to screening. The Sipples have gone on record on several occasions, both with county officials and in front of the MBAR, that privacy screening is their only concern. We have offered over the last many months many suggestions on how to accomplish this screening. They simply reject all proposals, stating simply that they want the old avocado trees back. If we were able to turn back the hands of time, we would do it in a second. I am not being glib. I am being completely serious. If only we could. But obviously we can't. It is not possible. The spilt milk cannot be put back in the bottle. Nor can an uprooted old avocado tree be replanted. Nor, we are advised by arborists, gardeners, and landscape people that mature avocado trees cannot be moved and replanted. Now, one thing I feel I must address is the colorful rhetoric of the Sipples. Taking nothing away from our desire to afford the Sipples the privacy they desire, I think the Commission must focus on the facts, not the rhetoric. There were 3 avocado trees in the setback area which were removed. The 3 avocado trees were old, probably 40-plus years old, near the end of their expected lives. In fact, many of the other trees from the former orchard had long ago died. If I could ask Holly, could you pull up the picture of the pre-construction overhead site? Can you hear me if I step over here?
You're going to need a mic.
Oh. This? Ah, there we go. Thank you. As you can see, this area here had, prior to our owning the property, had avocados on it. There were avocados here and here and here and here. They all died a natural death. These trees were near the end of their useful life. They had been untended for probably 15 or 20 years, and they had many dead branches sticking out of their uneven canopies. The branches of each tree did not intertwine, as had been alleged, as the trees stood apart. As the Sipples have expressed they want green screening, our landscape plan will provide superior screening to what was previously there, and will provide it faster than new avocado trees alone. The landscape plan has been designed in part due to the fact that we are restricted from planting avocado trees within the CRZs of the 3 oak trees that are on the mutual property line. If we plant new avocado trees too close together, as has been suggested a couple times, we are advised that they will not thrive. Avocado trees need space between them in order to grow and get the sunlight that they need. These trees, all the trees in the existing old orchard were, I think, 25 or 26 feet apart. I think Susan has the exact measurement, but I'm sorry, 24 feet apart. And that's what we're recommending on our plan to put back. 3 trees in as close a position as we could to what was there in the same spacing of the 24 inches, that 24 feet. This will allow those trees to grow. We have gone out and acquired the largest trees we could find that were boxed. They're 36-inch boxes. We had to bring them in from the Inland Empire, but we did that in an effort to try to resolve this matter. I would only stress again that as we cannot put the milk back in the bottle, we have to do something else that will provide the desired screening. That is why we bought the biggest trees we could find that are plantable where we need them, and have proposed the pittosporum hedge. Bob Easton will provide more specifics about the exact plan once I'm done with my presentation. With respect to the pending LUP, the second issue I'd like to discuss, for the LUP for the pool and cabana. This first went before the MBAR on July 16, 2007. The minutes reflect that the MBAR stated the project, quote, looks fine, close quote. We were given permission to return for preliminary final approval on consent. No further hearing required. In fact, Bob Easton can testify that the MBAR actually thought the situs was good because it was near the Sipples pool. To my knowledge, the Sipples are the only neighbors sharing a common property line with us that have a pool anywhere close to where we can build. None of the properties up here, actually, Holly, if you could pull up the site plan. Right, no? You had it for a second. There, stop. As far as I know, none of these properties have pools. The Sipples have a pool here, and there's a pool over here, but we couldn't put the pool over here because this is not, the building envelope ends about here, and the driveway has to take up the only part of the building envelope that we can use. So to put the pool by the pool, the MBAR felt was an appropriate siting. This July 2007 hearing was noticed to all neighbors, and there were no objections. The Sipples did not object to the siting of the pool or cabana. As they did not object then, it seems inappropriate that they object to the location now, especially as the Sipples and Ms. Petrovich have repeatedly stated that their only concern was privacy. The second time the matter of our pool and cabana went before the MBAR, a year later, on July 28, 2008. This was after the avocado trees had been removed. Although there was much discussion about the loss of screening and the best way to replace the screening, it is important to note that even with public comments from Susan Petrovich on behalf of the Sipples, Mrs. Sipple, Bill Palladini, and Tony Harbour, the MBAR stated that, quote, stated that they had, quote, no concern with the cabana, close quote. Finally, last month, in our most recent hearing in front of the MBAR members stated that they, quote, could support the accessory structures in this location if appropriately screened. You've been provided copies with all of these minutes in the staff report. I am myself at a bit of a loss why the county has presented their report to you in an incomplete fashion. Even in Ms. Bradbury's presentation to you now, she failed to tell you that the MBAR could support, and went on record that they could support the structure, the pool and cabana, where they are with appropriate screening. That's incredibly important, and why it was missed by the county and not stressed, I do not understand. Why did the acceptability of the location of the pool and cabana change between the first MBAR meeting and the second MBAR meeting? Was it different? The design did not change. The location did not change. Only two things changed. One, the Sipples lost their privacy. As neither they nor the county had made it clear to us that this was important to them, we proceeded to undertake what we considered to be permissible landscaping. We were taking down the trees in preparation for putting back new landscaping. The county determined otherwise. We agree that the Sipples are entitled to get their privacy screening back. And our proposal to this commission and to the MBAR provides that. The other thing that has changed is that the Sipples are angry. They're not just angry, they're hopping mad. They're blinded by rage. They are so mad that they will not be satisfied until they extract their pound of flesh. They will not rest until they have made us pay dearly for what they feel we did to them. Mr. Sipple, as you may or may not know, is a professional political consultant who specializes in creating spin. That's how he makes a living. His expertise is evident here.
Mr. Stone, let's keep to the facts, okay?
Yes. So the only objection to the situs of the pool and the cabana is from the Sipples. They did not originally object. In fact, the proposed pool was on the House LUP, which was approved and on which a building envelope was issued. Mr. Easton will show you that map if the county doesn't have it here. And that map was reviewed by the Sipples' own testimony in their statements, was reviewed by them. And they made no objection. This goes back in 2006. It was not on the plans for approval. So I'm not saying it was approved, but it was on there as a proposed future pool and cabana. We know that they looked at those plans. We know that they made no objection. Sorry, did you have a? You look like you wanted to ask a question. I'm sorry.
I will, but go ahead.
They've gone on record that they visited the county and they reviewed our plans. They made no objection. The record's unclear whether they went in on the new LUP, the pool and cabana LUP, but we certainly know they know how to because they did it on the House LUP, and we know that they know how to object. But they didn't. So over multiple noticed public hearings, the Sipples elected not to object. We've tried to reconcile the matter of their loss screening in a friendly and neighborly way. When we first received complaints from the Sipples, I invited Mr. and Mrs. Sipple to meet with me. At the time, my family was not yet living in town, but I told them I would make a special trip to Montecito to meet with them at their convenience, anytime and in any place. A meeting was set with Mr. Sipple, Bob Easton, and myself at Mr. Easton's office. I made the trip to Montecito.
Mr. Stone, let me interrupt just a second. The background is interesting, but this is not an appeal by the Sipples. You have issues with the county, and you have a map modification argument to pursue. Why don't we go in that direction? Change of circumstance, for instance, is something I'd like to hear.
I will get there.
Okay, let's wind up the Sipple issue, because.
Okay, the reason I've gone into it as deeply as I have is I think it's important to understand the entire situation. But I will get to the recorded map modification. Essentially, the result of that meeting was that Mr. Sipple, at the end of it, said that he had not come with any intent to try to resolve anything, but merely wanted to see what I looked like. I don't know how we resolve this in the absence of the commission stepping in. That's why I'm stressing the situation. My wife and I have tried to do everything we can to resolve this matter. That brings us to the RMM. We are here today requesting a minor change to the recorded map. This modification would allow for the over-excavation and recompaction of the soil in an area where the cabana is to be built. This modification is the only change we are requesting with respect to the original recorded map. If granted, this would allow us to excavate the soil in a small section of the setback on the southwest corner of our property. It would allow for the removal of the large boulders that we are confident we will find, which will allow for the most economical and streamlined construction of the cabana. The over-excavation will not impinge on the critical root zones of any oak trees. We have been advised by our arborist, Duke McPherson, that it will not significantly damage the only other tree in the area, an avocado tree that was on the south property line. There are no other plants in this area. I'd like to put into the record an addendum to Mr. McPherson's report where he verifies that. No, this is new. I don't believe you have this yet.
We just were given it. Oh, you were? No.
Please clarify the date of your letter.
This letter is dated March 25th, 2009.
Okay. bring that forward. Okay.
The staff report of the Planning and Development Department recommends that the Planning Commission deny our request on the recorded map modification. The report essentially states two reasons for this recommendation. The first is that the modification will somehow fail to adhere to the Montecito Community Plan with respect to protection of the oak trees. The second reason is because they failed to find a change of circumstance. With respect to the Montecito Community Plan, according to the report, the policies require protection of the oak trees to the maximum extent feasible. They state that the development envelopes were created for this purpose. We fully understand and appreciate the importance of protecting the native oak trees. We wish to do nothing that would endanger them in any way. However, Mr. McPherson, a well-respected arborist, has stated that our requested excavation would not create any risk to any oak trees as the excavation is far enough away from the critical root zones of any oak tree. In granting our requested recorded map modification, the Planning Commission would be fully adhering to the Montecito Community Plan policy for protection of the oaks. With respect to the requirement of a change of circumstances, the change of circumstances is the specificity of the development. It is fully understandable why, in the absence of a specific development plan, the county designed setbacks with a broad brush in order to best serve the community's needs. Protection of the oaks is one of those needs. When faced with a wide range of construction possibilities, broad restrictions are both appropriate and understandable. However, when a specific construction plan is put forth, this change in circumstances allows for a review of the restrictions. The Planning Department's report states that the imposed restrictions are to protect the oaks. As granting our modification would not endanger any oaks, the granting of the requested recorded map modification is both consistent with community policies and recognizes the change in circumstances of having a specific development plan, which definitely does not affect the oaks. I feel it is important to address certain inaccuracies in the staff report. On page 3, there is a reference to quote, unpermitted removal of 5 to 6 avocado trees that previously existed within the CRZs of the oaks. This is absolutely incorrect, and I have no idea where this information came from. There were 3 trees outside the building envelope that were removed. According to, as verified by our arborist in his arborist report, only one of those 3 trees was in the outer edge of one CRZ. You can see in Mr. McPherson's report of January 22nd, 2009, he clearly states only one avocado tree was located, quote, at the outer edge of the critical root zone of oak tree number 2, close quote. He then concludes, after examination of the tree, that the tree's health has not been negatively affected. This report is attached, and you can look at it for yourselves. In addition, on page 6, the summary of the February 23, 2009 hearing is incomplete and misleading. I would encourage the commissioners to read the approved minutes for themselves rather than the summary put forth by the staff. I also find several aspects of the staff report prejudicial. On page 3, in discussing the removal of the avocado trees, there is a reference to, quote, ripping, close quote, which seems nothing more than argumentative to me. Similarly, section 4.0 concludes with a statement that there is ample area to locate the pool and cabana elsewhere within the building envelope. This would seem to be an argument put forth by the Sippels and their attorney and has no place in the staff report. In section 5.4, the report references the conditions of approval by stating that there is a restriction, a quote, restriction on ground disturbing activities outside the development envelope, close quote. But the reference is incomplete and therefore misleading. The full language can be seen in the full restatement of paragraph 9, in which it expressly allows that ground disturbance can occur for flood control matters, for landscaping, and for fencing consistent with flood control and drainage. Again, I would direct the commissioners to the exact language rather than me restating it or the staff's abridged restatement. It's an important, extremely important difference when you look at what is and is not allowed in the setback area. As previously stated, we believe the removal of the avocado trees was permissible landscaping. This distinction between what constitutes landscaping and what constitutes activities which are prohibited outside the development envelope is further complicated by the fact that neither the conditions of approval for the lot split, the original lot split on the property, upon which we relied when we bought the property, or the conditions of approval for the LUP for the house had any express condition with respect to screening or that the avocados would remain. In Ms. Bradbury's presentation, she pointed out that the LUP said that avocado trees inside the development envelope were to be removed. But there was no prohibition about avocado trees outside the building envelope. I understand that it can be implied, but there was nothing express. And as the conditions of approval go on and on and on, it would seem to me that if there is a true prohibition, it would be express in the conditions. There is no prohibition against removing avocado trees outside the building envelope. The land use permit states that no native trees or vegetation are slated for removals. Avocado trees are not native trees. As I understand it, and I've been informed by several people, they are not protected in the same way that oaks are. I just want to once again stress that we believe that the removal of the avocado trees was in keeping with our rights, within our rights to do landscaping outside the development envelope. Finally, condition number 32 of the conditions of approval for our house states that, quote, "The project landscaping shall consist primarily of drought-tolerant and/or Mediterranean-type species that adequately screen the project from surrounding land uses." This condition clearly states that screening was required as a condition, but it is completely silent on any requirement that required the screening to be the existing avocados in the southwest corner of the property. In fact, I do not believe that avocados are either drought-tolerant or Mediterranean-type species. One could go so far as to argue that the removal of the avocado trees was necessary to comply with the conditions. I'm not making that argument at this point. I only pointed out to show evidence of the ambiguous nature of the conditions of approval. I'd like to just discuss one final thing, and I'd ask Ms.
Mr. Chair, there's something that's really missing for me here as we go through this project, and I'd just like to take a moment. I apologize for interrupting you, but I've been putting my light on. I request of staff that we have in front of us a site plan of the entire project. That is not in our, nope, that's just the corner that we keep talking about. A lot of references have been made by the applicant to the house location, the grading that was done, inside, outside. We, right here, okay. That's not in our information. I don't have that as a visual in front of me to understand all the ins and outs right now of what's being presented for us, like Ms. Petrovich is going to get up and say, well, there's another location. So is it possible to get prints of that so that at least for me, so that I understand what it is we're actually dealing with, rather than just having the corner of the project? It's just like, but I can't read that. I mean, come on. That is really difficult. Yeah, I would like to see a full size of the project. And it didn't come in our packet. No, it's not. Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry,
That's fine.
Do you track everything you're saying.
You can continue,
and
Mr.
I can't
Stone.
do it.
Okay. I would ask Ms. Bradbury to pull up the pictures, the before and after pictures that the county's cited. I think it's very important in looking at these pictures to understand something. The pictures as demonstrate a dramatic difference, but I think it's also one has to look at the context of photography, and photography can be used in many different ways. As you can see here, or as you cannot see here, a fence. This picture was taken in the summer, when, as we know, foliage is much denser. The Sippels have on their property a line of deciduous trees, which in the summer are quite full. And those trees are providing screening, and the proof of that is that you cannot see the fence that is there. As you all visited the site, you may recall that the Sippels property is entirely fenced, and this property, along our property line, there's a 6-foot wooden fence that runs the entire way. You can't see it in this picture. Can you go to the next picture, please? Here, there's the fence. You can see it. All these trees are deciduous. This picture was taken in the winter. It's not a fair comparison to compare a summer photo with a winter photo and say all the screening's gone. A lot of the screening that they had was their deciduous trees, which were screening the ability to even see the fence. The other thing that's important to recognize, and I would ask the commissioners to take it under consideration, as this picture is taken with a telephoto lens. With photography, I'm an amateur photographer. I'm not a professional photographer. I wish I could opine even more than what I'm going to say. But through the use of telephoto lens and the changing of an aperture, you change the depth of field. This picture makes the house appear much closer than it actually does because it's taken with a telephoto lens and probably with a wide aperture, which compresses the depth of field. So again, I just point that out, and looking at it, one must recognize that. It is for all the foregoing reasons that my wife and I respectfully request this commission approve the requested recorded map modification, which will allow us to build a pool and cabana entirely within the development envelope. There will be nothing outside the development envelope once the recompaction occurs. And the recompaction, the soil will be brought back to its existing elevation. We also request that you approve the landscape plan and siting of the pool and cabana, or whatever the terminology of the county is. If it's not approved, recommend to the MBAR that it's acceptable. That will allow us to put back appropriate screening in the southwest corner of the lot, which will provide the privacy screening required by the conditions of approval and provide the Sippels with their desired stated green wall of privacy. I would now like to ask Mr. Easton to talk more specifics about the landscape plan.
Okay, we're going to have, Mr. Easton will testify, and we're going to have questions of you, I'm sure. Just would you quickly review, you're here for a map modification. Can you identify the change of circumstance that would permit us to grant that?
The change of circumstances, as I see it, is that we now know, because we're putting it forth, exactly what the development is. When the original proposal, when the original lot split was done, and the conditions of approval were put on with the 25-foot setback, they were put on with the express intent of protecting the oaks on the property. And I understand that when you don't know what's going to be built there, and in fact that was done in 1999 and we didn't buy the property till 2006, when you don't know what's going to be there, it makes a lot of sense to draw a very broad setback which provides that protection. The change in circumstances is that we know now what we're requesting is a very small change which will not result in building outside the development envelope, but will not affect but allows us to go into it for a brief period of time, but will not affect the oaks. The change in circumstance is that we know exactly what it is we're asking, you know exactly what it is we're asking, and you can grant it knowing you're not going to be doing anything that will be detrimental to the oaks.
Okay, very good. Stay there a second. Questions of Mr. Stone? Commissioner.
Yes, at the beginning of your presentation, you talked about the original grading and recompaction and all of that was done prior to all of this. My question is, like, why was that done? I mean, what was the purpose of doing that grading and recompaction before your design for the cabana and the pool was designed or needed? I mean, like a whole lot of stuff was done that you said your contractors did. I mean, I don't understand why any of that was done in the first place.
It wasn't a whole lot. It was one thing. It was to over-excavate where we believed the pool would be, and the intent was to recompact. The stop work order was put on before we could recompact immediately, so the hole sat there while the county dealt with the issue, and then we were given permission to recompact and put the elevation back to what it was, which was what we had intended to do. That was the only thing that happened ahead of time, and the reason it happened was because this excavator was on site, because it had been used for the house.
No, I got all of that. But where I'm going with this is that given that it was excavated and recompacted, why are we doing it again? What's the need for going outside of the development envelope to excavate and recompact again?
I understand your question.
Can you get that?
Yes. There are two different areas. They're adjacent to each other, but there's the pool and the cabana. The intent was to do it all at the time we were doing it. The stop work order came in before the excavation of the cabana area was done. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Commissioner.
Just to be clear, are you indicating to us that the location of the pool and the location of the cabana have not changed from the plans that existed at the time that the earlier excavation was done?
That is correct. They have not changed.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make clear that those were not approved.
Those were not approved.
They were not approved.
I see.
Right, no, but if I may, there was conceptual approval, and I think I said that in my presentation. There was not preliminary or final approval, but there was conceptual.
Mr. Chair, our process is very clear, and I think everybody in the room understands our process. We have a BAR process and we have a land use process, and they were at the very beginning of the BAR process, conceptual review.
Okay.
Not through land use, not through BAR.
Commissioner Burrows, questions? Any other questions? Tell me how I can overlook your zoning violation. How are we going to do that? Any ideas for us? It's in the way. You know that.
Well, I have two responses to that. The first is we have been working with the county to try to rectify it, and the county has understood why we can't yet rectify it without resolution and agreement from the SIPLs. We've stood ready to remediate from day one, long before there was a zoning violation even alleged. So I think that the delays that have been caused have been due to not being able to find a common ground, not because we have been resistant. And as I said, we've brought trees in anticipation at a significant expense to try to be in a position to put them in the ground. They're sitting in boxes right now in location, but once we have approval, they'll be in the ground within a couple days.
I see.
And the other thing I would point out is, as I said, well, there's two other things, if I may, Mr. Chair. Although the buck stops with my wife and I, we trusted people with over 100 years of experience that we were not creating a zoning violation. We had no intent to deceive. We had no intent to violate any zoning laws or any other rules or regulations. We understand the county is taking the position that we have, but I again would argue that I'm not sure it really is a zoning violation, given the ability, given that there's no prohibition in the conditions of removing the avocados, and given that we are allowed to do landscaping in the setback area.
Okay, very good. One more question.
I have a question for the county in regard to this issue. Do we do that now or later?
You may, and I think we've concluded questions, and we'll see Mr. Easton in a second.
Thank you. My question to the county is, could you please review for us the steps that have been taken in negotiating or in addressing the zoning violation?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Burrows, I can. Originally, again, there was a stop work order placed by our permit compliance officer, and step one, to deal with the public health and safety issue, was to refill the holes. And so that was done. Step two was to reestablish the screening between the two properties. But before we could do that, we had to establish how many trees had been removed. So we've been out to the field. I have been out to the field personally with my deputy, with the grading inspector. Ms. Petrovich was with us once, and with our permit compliance officer, with measuring tapes, and there are stakes in the ground out there that show where the building envelope is, to try and determine which, because there are rows of avocado trees. It was an orchard, so there was regular planting, to see which trees were within the building envelope and so were able to be removed pursuant to the description of the land use permit for the house, that they can remove them from within the envelope, and which trees were outside of the building envelope. And we have been unable to affirmatively state how many trees were removed. There appear to be 2 rows of avocado trees outside the building envelope, one almost immediately adjacent to the fence, and one about 20 feet in from that, because they were on center spacings of 23 to 24 feet. Where we look at the row of trees that was closest to the development envelope, we were fairly certain, measuring 24-foot intervals, that there are 3 trees removed there. The trees, though, along the fence, it was unclear where that line of avocado trees ended. So even though they were regularly spaced at 23 feet, we weren't sure how many of those had been there, because those holes have been filled in as well, and leaf matter is over them, so it's very difficult to see. So we have thought about how do we deal with this violation with the screening, and we've decided that what we're proposing is that we're not going to be seeking an exact number of trees and saying you need to replace this exact number of trees, but rather we're going to be looking at the previous circumstance of complete screening and say within 3 years you need to provide complete screening again, whatever that screening is, pursuant to the MBAR's approval. So that is what we have done to date, and we are still seeking the MBAR's approval on what that screening is going to be, and to the extent that your commission can provide direction, given the neighborhood interaction, we are hoping that you can provide some direction in that regard as well.
Any questions of Ms. Olney? I have one quick one. In my reading, and I may have missed it, and I could well have, but it seems to me the building envelope identified for the original LUP was about protection of oak tree and not screening. I don't remember screening being an issue. I don't know why we're even getting to screening. I think this issue is about the root protection from those oak trees.
Mr. Chair, the original map in 1999 was approved with development envelopes, and the nexus for those development envelopes was the care and maintenance and perpetuation of the existing oak trees on site.
Right.
Okay, so there's that fact. Building envelopes were also drawn to ensure adequate setbacks and privacy. Clearly, that's another reason for setbacks. At this point, we're talking about screening because in the land use permit that gave the Stones the entitlement to build the house and the attached residential second unit, there were, and you can see on the plans that Commissioner Gottstinker has, there were drawings of 3 or 5 avocado trees, and there's an annotation on those approved plans that says to remain.
Sure.
Then there is a condition of approval as part of that land use permit that adequate screening needs to be provided between this property and its adjacent neighbors. So therefore,
And
when we're
This was after the 99 LUP.
after the 1999 LUP in 2006, when the Stones sought entitlement for the construction of their house that is now under construction. So there were several things in that land use permit. There was an indication that those existing avocado trees were to remain. There was an allowance for the stones, the applicant to choose the landscape planting material for screening. That was another note on the plans. And there was a specific condition in the land use permit for the house that specified that adequate screening needed to be provided. At this point, we're talking about screening because those 3 avocado trees, which were providing a bulk of screening between the subject property and the property to the west, have been removed, and there is an inadequate state of screening at this point.
But we still would have a zoning violation even if the sipples were not involved.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Easton, I believe you want to speak. Thank you, Ms. Ullman.
Thank you, Holly, and you could put up the next slide, please, and I'll say next when I would like to have them changed. Chairman Phillips and fellow commissioners, Bob Easton, the project architect, and I would have up here at the present time, and it's very difficult to see, I realize, but this is a site plan different than the one you looked at previously on the screen here, because this is the approved landscape plan for the permitted house. And as you can see, this was done before the pool plan was submitted for. This was part of the approved plan that was permitted at the end of 2006, and it wasn't until July of 2007 that we went in with the proposal to build the cabana and pool. However, it was graded for, and it's shown here if you can see it, the grading lines. So when the initial grading was done and the trees were removed in here within the building envelope, the plan that I drew, I said on the plan avocados to remain, and it pointed out the trees that people are referring to. I was not told to have that note on the plans. I put that note on there because I anticipated that those trees would be able to remain. And so therefore it's all part of a document now that's referred to, but it was from my instigation and not county instigation to put that note on there. Now what happened on site was that the house was constructed, construction began, and the compaction, the soil removal and repaction was done for the house. And we had submitted then later the plans in July of 2007 for the pool house and the cabana, and the contractors, project managers knew that we would be doing the pool and cabana. And as Mr. Stone pointed out, the excavator had become available. And the contractors showed initiative in saying, let's take advantage of his availability and excavate for the pool and the cabana. And they did check with the grading inspector, and that was the first inspector that Mr. Stone referred to. The second inspector he referred to was the compliance officer, who came out in response to the SIPLs notifying the county that there was something going on and trees were removed. Unfortunately, the project managers decided that those trees had to come down. I was not informed, and I don't know if Mr. Stone was informed, but they showed the initiative in taking those trees down. They did not have to take the trees down in order to do this over-Xing, or they didn't discuss with me the construction of the pool. And so, unfortunately, this proceeded, and Mr. Stone and Mrs. Stone and myself and the contractors all feel bad about what happened. But they did talk to the grading inspector, and the grading inspector said, go ahead and do it. Now, this refers back to what Commissioner Gostanker was talking about earlier, that there's a disconnect between the Planning Commission and some of the planning department and the grading department here.
Mr.
Because this is something that does tend to happen, It happens with Public Works, and it happens with the grading department. And that's something you folks need to address also.
Would you permit a question now?
Yes, please.
Commissioner?
Mr. Easton, I was going to ask you the question because you seem to imply that the permission was given by the grading inspector. I think you've answered that question in the second part of your testimony. I just want to ask staff, do we have anything in the record that would indicate that that permission was given?
Mr. Chair, this is the first I've heard that statement, so no, not to my knowledge.
I will say as an architect, having practiced in this community for 40 years, that this is not an uncommon situation. And as Commissioner Gostager knows, it is not an uncommon situation for many of these special agencies within the county. And this is now blown up into this major problem. I would also like to comment.
May I interrupt you
Yes.
one more second? Ms. Black.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that our discussion isn't confused by the previous discussion about special agencies. The grading, what's been referred to as the grading department, is not a special agency. It's a part of planning and development, and a part that I also oversee. So just wanted to make that clear.
My point being there are field decisions that tend to be made on a very consistent basis, which is part of the reality of construction also. But I do want to point out that the anger that the Sipples do feel about this particular situation is actually began on another incident in regard to the grading, and there was a pile of dirt created for the residential excavation, and it was wet down, but per code, but there was a big wind, and they experienced some dust on their property, and they did complain about that, and we tried to remediate that. The contractors called us, and I said, please cover it up and see that doesn't happen again. So, but they did become quite upset about that. So there's been a history here. But I just want to be brief now, and I showed you that we did have a landscape plan for the residents, and let's do the next slide. This slide shows the existing residence without the landscape plan, but shows the area of the pool and cabana with our proposed landscape plan. Next. This now is the close-up, and we went through a number of different possibilities with replacing the trees that were cut. And it's pretty obvious to us, and I realize that the county does not have an exact record of what happened, but in terms of my understanding of what happened, of talking to people, we have an existing oak tree here, we have an existing oak tree here, we have an existing oak tree here, and these are the critical root zone circles. And we have an existing avocado tree here, and we have an existing avocado tree here. And they have, we have 24 feet to here, we have 24 feet to here, we have 24 feet to here, and we have 24 feet to here. And this orchard, from all understanding, the trees were 24 feet apart. And I would place the removed tree here, the removed tree here, and the removed tree here. So at the instigation of the MBAR, they suggested that we replace the 3 trees. And so these are the 3 trees we propose to replace. We looked all over Southern California. We found 3 avocado trees in 36-inch boxes that tend to be about 15 to 20 feet tall. And so we bought the biggest trees that we could find, and we brought them out and put them in place here. So we put them in place in here, because in this area here originally, and that was a previous slide that I believe that Ms. Bradford showed, that kept the trees out of the critical root zones of the oak trees. And however, the board did not like that. They wanted us to place them as close as possible to where the original trees were. So we have placed them the excavation for the 36-inch box requires a 5-foot square excavation to be able to lower the box in place. And we were hesitant to place it under the critical root zone of this oak tree because Mr. Stone does not want to be responsible for this tree dying or having a problem. So I've fudged it in here as close as I can get it without it being in the exact location of the original tree, which seems to be right here if we take this 24, 24, 24, 24 dimension. We have a volunteer avocado, or what appears to me to be an avocado, a volunteer here and here, which are remaining. And then we would propose retaining the existing fence, which is just right along the property line, and then at the suggestion of the MBAR and their landscape persons, to come with a wandering pittosporum hedge that would not be all lined up in a straight line, but look more naturalistic, and to irrigate that. And so to that end, we produced the letter of the arborist to say that we can irrigate under the oak tree if it's done in a particular and sensitive way. And again, we would use 15-gallon pittosporums, which are recommended by landscape people and the arborist as being the right size of tree to put in the ground so it'll grow very quickly. So we're doing everything here possible that we can to aggressively reestablish screening. Next slide, please. These are the elevations of the Cabana pool house. It's a one-story building. It's not very tall. I don't know if the story pole was still up when story poles were still up, identifying this end of the building nearest to the property line when you folks visited. I'm not sure if it was, but I just wanted to show you this picture saying that it's a similar aesthetic as to the house of Santa Barbara Mediterranean design. Next. This is a slide that you've seen before, so we can pass over this. Next, please. And this is a photograph from the Stone property looking toward the Sipples property, again taken during the summer when there was foliage on the deciduous trees. And so as you can see, there's quite a bit of density during the summer, probably spring and fall parts of the year.
Mr. Easton, could you back up? Could you ask, Ally, could you just, no, go back. I just wanted to see the overhead of the screening on the Sipples property. That's what I was looking for.
In this area here?
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, that's the big oak trees are here and here. And then the deciduous screening doesn't show up that well, but you can see it as it's in there. Next, and we can go on to the next slide, and this is our last slide. This is another perspective from the Stone property, and you can see the density of the screening on the Sipple property, again taken during the spring, summer, or fall times of the year. And I believe that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Eaton? Thank you very much. Oh,
Mr. Stone would like to.
question for you first.
Yes.
Commissioner Overall.
Mr. Easton, I can't lay my hand on the exact page in here, but the conversation so far has been totally about avocado trees as replacements, and I know that I read in here that there seemed to be a willingness to consider other kinds of trees, and yet we've heard no comment about that. Would you be kind enough to address that? Was something else considered? Anything else proposed?
I can't remember if we proposed something at an earlier MBAR meeting, but with the Sipples and the Sipples attorney wanting to have avocados back, we've stayed focused on avocados.
Thank you. Mr. Stone, go ahead.
One of the reasons that we were focused on replacing the avocados is that because the Sipples had expressed their desire to have the avocados back so strongly, the county requested us to consider the avocados. We discussed whether we could put olives back in its place or something else, and in our conversations with the county, they thought it would be easier to find common ground with our neighbor if we stuck with avocados.
Thank you.
If I may, if it's not out of order, I'd like to just address one issue on one of Bob's slides.
Go ahead.
Ms. Bradbury, could you go back to the full site plan? Sorry, back one more. I just want to point out for the commission that, again, this was the site plan that was approved, with the landscape plan approved with the LUP for the house. And what was provided here, and I acknowledge they were avocados, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 avocados, 1, 2, 3. These 3 small ones remain. This one remains, and that one remains. This issue is about just these 3 avocados. So in some respects, to me, it doesn't matter what the county can figure out or not figure out about what was there, what wasn't there. This was what was approved as sufficient screening to issue a building permit and a land use permit. So to me, this is dispositive as to what we need to replace or try to get back to in terms of providing screening. And unfortunately, we can't put back big enough avocados that will provide this kind of screening, which is why we're putting back 3 that will grow to that over time and a pittosporum hedge to provide screening in the interim.
Very good. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we have several issues on the table, and I'm finding that we're spending an inordinate amount of time talking about, as you point out, 3 avocados, when we have a map modification to deal with, which, without dealing with that first, the whole issue of the avocados becomes a moot point for me. We got to get whether we're going to be able to do, whether the applicant's going to be able to get the map modification so they can proceed with the project of the pool and the cabana and everything else that needs to be done. The trees, that's like way down the line for me. So I kind of would like to just have the testimony and everything keep to the map modification at this point, rather than continuing on with these trees and hedges and all this. That's an MBAR issue, that's not our issue.
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Stone. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottstinker, I think you're spot on in terms of the issue here. The tree issue is certainly an issue that needs to be addressed once the commission determines whether or not you're going to grant the recorded map modification, because the recorded map modification obviously affects the amount of area that you would have to screen. I think part of the reason you've been hearing both is because the trees have been the real big issue, and to make sure that the commission understands that there's an effect on what you can do in terms of screening if the recorded map modification is approved.
Very good.
But I agree. First things first, you need to address the map modification, and then if you have comments for the MBAR and staff about methods of screening, that would be helpful, but it's certainly not really your purview right now.
Exactly.
Yes, thank you. I think I can add a clarification in the map modification. If Ms. Bradbury would bring up your presentation again and bring up the site plan that had the shaded areas for the excavation into the setback area. That was it. Oop, that's it, thank you. Okay, here we see the swimming pool, and here we see the cabana, this area being open. And the shaded area is a 5-foot, meant to represent a 5-foot extension, which is traditional in the soil engineering business to be the over-X. They over-excavate 5 feet beyond the actual foundation line to put back the compacted fill. Makes a mat that you put the building on, and it extends out 5 feet past the line of the building. And that's also true for the structure of a swimming pool. And it has to do with the distribution of load. And so what happened was that when they removed the avocado trees, they excavated 5 feet outside of the line of the structure of the swimming pool. And the violation was noted at that time, and so that is something we remediated through working with the county to be able to go forward and compact the soil and put everything back. So that's the condition of the site now. When you visited, you walked around in this area and it looked like just flat dirt, which it is, but it has been recompacted and put back in to be excavated in the future for the construction of the pool shell. So what's at issue now, the only thing that's at issue now is the 5 feet of over excavation around this part of the cabana. And that's what we're asking for, because what will happen is that soil will be dug down about 5 feet, and then the boulders and heavy cobbles taken out, and then the soil will be recompacted again to a exact level that it is now. And so that's really all we're asking for with the RMM. And yes, as pointed out by Ms. Bradbury, we do have alternative methods of doing a foundation. We could not bother to over-X, but in this soil condition we would have to use caissons, or we could use a heavy mat foundation, which would be 2 feet thick poured concrete under the entire building. So it would float as a building on top of what is deemed to be a unstable soil. So if we did not do the over-excavation and we did another foundation technique, which is much more expensive than the over-excavation and doing the regular foundation, as Mr. Stone pointed out, is an economic alternative here that seems to make sense, good, wise use of resources. We would not have to have the recorded map modification, in which case then the issue of the screening and the location of the pool and cabana become important issues, which are either part of your purview or not. And that's something that you need to discuss with Ms. Almy and Ms. Black, I think, and to determine that. So there is, if you feel that the over-excavation is egregious enough that you can't approve that, then the discussion perhaps should go on to the location of the pool and cabana, because the future of it in that location may come into question here in Ms. Petrovich's testimony. And so if you just refer it back to the MBAR has a history of liking it in this location and saying that it's fine and they could approve it. That's been said at 3 different meetings at the MBAR. And so in order to get this project done, we don't want to have to leave here, go to the MBAR, and then be kicked back to you again on an appeal basis. So I think that we're looking for direction here, are
Ms.
we not, Ms. Almy and Ms. Black?
Well,
Chair.
why don't we hear everyone's comments, and then we'll see what kind of direction we can give you.
Well, I want
Go ahead, Ms. Black.
to make it clear what we're noticed to discuss today and what we're not noticed to discuss. You're not making a decision on the location of this cabana and pool. You're making a decision on a recorded map modification, which might allow a cabana and pool in this area. But really what you're doing is you're making a decision on a recorded map modification. And I think we've helped to confuse this hearing by suggesting you might want to weigh in on screening. The screening really isn't in your purview right now. If we approve something that requires a permit, it can be appealed to your commission. So it could be in the future, but it really isn't there today. It's really background information so you understand the complexity of the recorded map modification and the issues surrounding it.
Very good. Public comment. Do you have a?
Yes, I have
Yes,
a
go
question
ahead.
for Ms. Black. This RMM that we're dealing with, we're not proposing to actually relocate the development envelope line. What we're proposing is to allow grading to take place where we have language that says it shall not take place. Is that the modification that we're asking, or we're,
Miss-
or we're?
Mr. Chair
I'm a
and
little
Commissioner
confused.
Gottstinker, I think what you're being asked to do is to expand the development envelope for grading, not for structural development.
Yeah, just so that the grading could take place outside of the envelope.
Correct.
But the envelope itself stays the same.
The building envelope would stay as it was. The envelope for site disturbance would grow to this
Got
area.
it. Thank you. Yeah,
Very
really
good.
clear.
Let's turn to public comment. I have, I'm sorry. Yeah. 5 minutes?
Mr. Chair, I hate to interrupt the flow of this hearing, but Mr. Mosby is here, and I don't want to keep him here through all of this discussion, so I don't know if you want to return to your consent agenda and ask questions and let him go, or what you
Any
would like to
objections?
do. Want to take a 5-minute break first?
And then we'll talk to Mr. Mosby and then get back to
I think it will only
public
take a
comment.
moment.
Is that all right? Okay, let's do that. Thanks. We are on standard agenda item number 2.
No,
I'm
we're
sorry.
going back, Mr. Chair.
Oh, we're on the consent agenda item. Mr. Mosby, would you mind addressing us? We have some questions on your water pipe.
Absolutely, I'm ready for your questions.
Okay, we're ready to answer,
Okay.
ask them. Do we have a question to Mr. Mosby? Mr. Overall.
Mr. Mosby, basically, the question that I raised was, it seems to be a departure to have the High Line located above ground, and I asked the question of why, and was hoping for a little bit more in-depth answer than the agenda provided.
You know, that's actually a good question. We studied this quite extensively. Normally, as you know, everything is buried. We put everything underground. When we put it underground, we ask for about a 12, 15-foot wide easement so we can have vehicles, trucks, and access that pipeline. In this particular case, due to the constraints of the building envelope and the fact that we face up against the slope, to actually go ahead and bury this pipeline would require that we move back into the slope even further. We would still then need the 12 to 15-foot wide easement, which would even cause more of a cut and excavation process. So in order to minimize that, what we ended up doing is we looked at the actual existing slope out there, recognizing that existing slope is going to stay the same. If we put the pipeline at the toe of the slope at the bottom, you're going to have the slope above it. There really will be no visual impacts. Not only that, then we can actually ask for a narrower easement. And that's what the key was to this project, is in getting a narrower easement, there's less impact, less further going into the slope itself. That's why we ended up going this way. And I'm hoping this may be something that really works out well for us, and it may be a way to minimize impacts even to future Highline relocations, if the circumstances permit it.
That seems to cover it. Thank you, that helps. But one additional question, I guess,
Yes.
semi-comment. In terms of the finish of the wall, is your district subject to the same kinds of regulations that govern a private development, in that the wall has to be finished in earth tones and that kind of thing? Or is that up to the owner of the property, or just how does that work?
I think in this case, I don't necessarily see us as being subject to those conditions, but I believe the property owner in this situation will probably indicate that they will make some certain changes so that it will meet the actual area.
Why would the property owner have a decision as to a water line? It's on their property, I know that, but.
Okay.
You get to pick colors,
As far as the
wall, tonation.
You know, that's a question. Again, we're doing this to minimize impact to the environment in that area. I mean, we can go ahead and bury it, but again, it's going to be a lot more intensive, labor-intensive effort. As far as the wall goes, and I can actually refer this back to Susan Petrovich, maybe an answer she wishes to give. What will happen is because we're relocating this pipeline off an existing building envelope, the owner of the property will be required to do that work. And I guess in this instance, I think I answered my own question, we can actually request that that wall be finished in a certain way so as to address your concerns.
The wall's not yours. The wall is not per se the Montecito Water District's.
What'll happen is all the facility improvements that are generated by this project will be dedicated to the Montecito Water District once we've accepted them and they've met all the requirements that we've asked for. Because remember, Claire, the pipeline, the easement, all the facilities within it, we're going to own it. He's got to dedicate it to us, so it has to be done to a certain requirement spec, and we're the ones that actually approve the plans for the new pipeline relocation. So we can actually put a specific condition in there.
Got it.
I see no other questions. I thank you for coming down.
Excellent.
Appreciate
Good
it.
to see you all again, okay?
Thank you. Okay, let's take a look at this and see if we can get a motion.
I make a motion that we approve item C1, now move to our agenda rather than the consent agenda. That was a little awkward. I think
Motion by Commissioner Overall to approve the installation of approximately 325 feet of 14-inch diameter water line and appurtenance as indicated in C1 on our consent item. All in favor?
I
Oh,
think you need
second,
a
please.
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Burrows. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. We are back to our regular agenda, item number 2, the stone map modification, and I believe we're open for public comment, and I see a slip from Ms. Petrovich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. My name again is Susan Petrovich with the law firm of Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, Schreck, and I'm here representing the Sipples, who couldn't attend, but they are asking that you understand their need for the restoration of their privacy screening and why that's relevant to this map modification. And Ms. Black touched on that, but I want to elaborate on it. The Sipples feel more strongly than ever about this subject after 10 months of a house looming over their yard where once there was a solid wall of vegetation. I presume you all received my letter, particularly with the colored before and after photographs. And if you didn't go on the site visit, I'm not sure, site visit looking at this from the Sipples yard.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Commissioner Gottstanker was able to look from the Sipples yard. So that's why I just wanted to point out that you can't really appreciate what a huge impact the stone project now has on the Sipples' privacy and on their yard. And I'm here, and the Sipples have raised an objection because of the loss of the screening. But the screening and this proposal, and I'm glad you've got this exhibit up here because I think I can demonstrate something that is evident on those plans that Commissioner Gottstanker has. And this is an issue that the MBAR hasn't even learned about. I just learned about it recently. But maybe if I could just do a little history. The Sipples have been good neighbors from the outset regarding the Stones house. That is until the obliteration of the landscape screening. The Sipples did do their due diligence before the Stones land use permit was issued. They went to the county, they saw the plan, and even though the plan only shows a few of the avocados, when the staff and I went out there, it was evident that outside the building envelope, there were substantial avocado growth, and you can tell that by looking at the before photographs that I provided to you. These were specimen trees, and when the Sipples, so they were protected by the Montecito Community Plan, and when the Sipples looked at the site plan and saw the two remain marking the avocado trees, and incidentally, that plan didn't show the oak trees, so that plan is not a complete plan. It doesn't show all the avocados that were there, and it doesn't show the oak trees, but When they looked at what was there, and when they looked at the plan, they were reassured that the screening would remain, and it did remain. And that was all they needed to conclude that the stone project wouldn't have a long-term effect on them. Yes, it would have short-term noise impacts, but as good neighbors, they had a live and let live approach, and they didn't oppose the project, which is pretty massive when you look at it from their yard. The key, of course, is, and you can see this much more clearly when you look at the first photograph of my before photos, they couldn't see anything except the very north part of the house, and that was just a little glimpse. So the project began construction, no problems. It wasn't until the day came when Mrs. Sipple was out in her backyard and saw a full-grown avocado tree in a bucket being lifted over her fence, root ball, the entire tree, and realized that all the screening was being removed. That's what created the problem.
The
Now,
problem
why
is,
is
the
this-
problem is there's no screening anymore.
That's the only change of circumstance, and that change of circumstance, of course, was a zoning violation. And that, when you ask the straight-out question, what is the change of circumstance that would justify granting this modification to the building envelope, let me point out what the change of circumstance is. First of all, was the introduction of the pool and cabana. That wasn't on the original plan that the Sipples reviewed, and that is what has necessitated the removal of the avocados, because they went ahead without a permit and over-excavated. I mean, all this smoke and mirrors aside, I don't think I've ever heard so much hogwash of justifying repeated violations of our ordinances in any setting before this commission. Maybe you have, but I haven't heard it. The plan that was brought to the MBR, for instance, you asked Mr. Stone, has your pool plan changed? Well, yes, it did. There used to be a pool deck showing out over the same area that's showing for over-excavation. They had a pool deck. And that's why they said they can't replace the avocados. There's no room. Then it became, we have to over-excavate. But then Mr. Easton testified in a later MBR meeting, well, we've already over-excavated, because you know what? That big pile of dirt and the hole that we made in the ground, that was the over-excavation. And that was, incidentally, the pile of dirt that they left uncovered during the middle of the windstorms. No water, no cover, and it blew dirt into the Sipples' yard. And then they're surprised that the Sipples were upset with them about that, even after they had asked repeatedly that it be covered. The reason why I'm mentioning this is that I heard all of this, it's basically the Sipples' fault that we have violated the ordinances. And in fact, it's the other way around. I think we need to look at this logically and objectively. There is no room for them to replace the avocado trees. There was no room for this pool because the avocados would have been hanging over the pool. You can't have shade and dropping leaves and all the sticks that avocados drop, because if you've had one in your yard, you know they're very dirty trees. They drop stuff. You can't have that over a pool. So you had to get rid of before you could propose a pool, you had to get rid of the trees. Then you go ahead and over-excavate. Now you come and ask for forgiveness and a permit for more over-excavation and for the over-excavation you've already done. And you say, we can't replace the screening, there's not enough room, so let's do a pittosporum hedge. We'll do this little pittosporum hedge, which is much thinner and provides much less screening and depth of screening than the avocados did.
Mm-hmm.
But more important, and here's what it shows on the plans, and you can see it, the beginning of it right here. One thing that Mr. Easton has never mentioned to you, and I didn't realize it until the day that we were out in the field, looking at trying to count these trees and trying to find the old pits where the trees had been, that part of the plan, the drainage plan, requires a wall for flood control purposes, and then a drainage swale that has to come down somewhere between the house up here, and this property line. Well, you got the oak trees here, the oak canopies, pretty much occupy all this area. And now you're going to try to put a pool here and a cabana here. The eaves even overhang the building envelope. That's how much we're pushing this. And now we're going to somehow fit a drainage swale. Where's the landscape screening going to go? It's not. There's not enough room in here. And that is the whole problem. That's why they're asking to push out this building envelope, to over-excavate, to allow for things that really aren't going to fit in here, when if we could go back to the site plan of the whole site, you've got a huge area available for this pool, and they keep calling it a cabana, and I've mentioned to some of you that I've objected to that because if you look at every definition of a cabana, it can have no cooking facilities, and it has to be related to a pool. Okay, I've asked over and over again, why isn't the pool up here? Well, the answer is we want to have that as lawn.
May I interrupt 1 second? Let me ask you this, if I could. Assuming that there was not a zoning violation, assuming the avocados were not taken away or replaced or removed, rather, is the rest of their argument sound in that a map modification can be obtained when a new kind of building is envisioned on an existing LUP that doesn't impact the root system? Assuming that was the case, would this map modification be legitimate?
No, you couldn't do it. There's still not room. Because that drainage that has to be provided, and it's on the drainage plan, that drainage is flood control. That's overland flow. You have to provide it. One of the reasons too for removing the avocados, and you'll notice how neatly they space them, in between, if you show the plan for the pool, there are these various sumps because they need to control the runoff. They need to do something. Right between them, they've got these sumps. So these are to drain the deck and this upper area here. So that that's why they're not putting greater screening in there. The bottom line is there's not enough room. And I guess the problem here, the biggest problem here, is that we have repeated zoning violations that got us to this position, and then a request for forgiveness. And you've probably heard this over and over again, but from the Sippels' perspective, this is not their problem. This is the Stones' problem. The Stones created it, and you can't believe all the different versions of this story I've heard at the MBAR, so you're just hearing yet another version of it. I'm not going to go into any, I don't care about the personal attacks. The point is that these folks put themselves in this corner, and they've trying to cram all these improvements into one little corner of the property. They got a whole lot of extra room somewhere else, and it's not all going to fit, and there's not going to be the screening, and the Sippels are going to have to continue to look at a house that you can be sure they would have objected to that big house if they had not had that screening in place. It's 100% guaranteed, but they didn't. So, maybe I could, if you would just give me a second, I
think we have it, unless
Okay.
anyone else needs any more.
Okay.
Would you permit questions? We might have some.
Absolutely.
Mr. Rover, Commissioner Gottsnecker?
Okay, thank you.
I assume you're going to have relief possibility for your client in the zoning violation issue. Are you?
We haven't had so far. It's been 10 months. 10 months. Mr. Easton, I talked to him at least 3 times, separate occasions, begging him to put trees in there. That was before I realized how much they're trying to cram in there. I see now why they didn't do that. He heard me and said, well, we can only get 10-foot trees. And I said, well, then put a lot of them in there. Well, if you put in more trees where the pool is going to go and where the cabana is going to go, you could actually be stepping up a slope, and you could have adequate screening. You could have more than adequate screening. You could almost replicate the screening that was there before, but not in this little narrow area that they're talking about. And so my suggestion to you is the problem with the map modification for the Sipples is that there's no, first of all, with the zoning violation, there's nothing that says they can't remediate it inside the building envelope now that they've created the violation. They can, and they can be required to do that. And if they, this is sort of where the MBAR was going at their last meeting. They said, look, we don't want to hear about your problems. We want you to come to us with a reasonable way, and we don't care about how wide it has to be. We want you to come to us with a reasonable way that you can restore the screening. And that we have yet to see that. A pittosporum hedge where they're in an area that's completely avocado orchard. I mean, there are avocados on every property all around. To stick in 3 lousy trees and a pittosporum hedge in place of that dense screening that was there before is just ridiculous. But I don't see where you're going to put the swale in there. That's the problem. So I think your map mod would preclude us from having the screening and the swale that's already required, and they know it's required, and it's never been mentioned in any of these forums.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No questions for Ms. Petrovich. We have another speaker slip, Bill Palladini. No.
Thank you, Chair Phillips and Commissioners. Bill Palladini for the Montecito Association. Pardon my voice. You've received a letter from us dated, signed by Peter Van Dynwick, our president, dated March 11th. As comment on this is passed unanimously by a motion of the Board of Directors. And I just wanted to clarify one thing on here. Could I see the slide, please, that has the blue border of the where the compaction is going to go? That one there. Thank you. I think just to try to get to the essence of the issue, because the letter really addresses the recorded map modification, which is the issue before you. And I think the concern that the board has was that what is the impact on both the screening and the existing native trees and root zones of this proposed compaction that extends into the buffer, into the out of the envelope, building envelope. That is the essence of the question for us, because it really is designed to protect natural resources. That's the whole reason for having that buffer and for screening. So it seems like those are the essential issues, is what's the impact on screening or proposed screening and on native tree root zones of this work? Okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to close public comment, seeing no other speaker slips, and I open this to our deliberations. Commissioner Burrows.
I think I have a question for Mr. Stone.
All righty, I'll open up. Mr. Stone, would you
Mind.
ask one question?
My question is, and you may have answered it in your prior presentation, why are you not willing to move your pool and cabana up to the other area that seems to be, to me, a far better place for that?
The reason we don't want to move, the reason we cited the pool where we cited it and don't want to move it is because we have 3 young kids who we want to have the large turf area for them to play on. If we put the pool there, then it becomes more of an adult entertainment center, which is not how we see the property. Our kids are 7, 5, and 2. They will be living at the house a long time, and we want them to be able to do whatever it is that kids want to do on a turf area. The pool, by siting it down low, Mr. Easton's design allows you to actually be able to see the pool. It is fenced separately, and it allows you to see the pool from above because it's down below, and so you can actually be sitting up higher and see what's going on down at the pool. So as the kids get older and can swim by themselves, you can at least see it. So it makes sense for both those reasons to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do I get an opportunity to rebut any of this stuff or not?
You don't. This is not an appeal. I looked for that. You can comment, yes, go ahead.
I very quickly, because I appreciate the time that the commission has given this matter. The Montecito Association put this letter in. I just want to point out, and just speaking to Mr. Palladini, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe you acknowledged that although the letter seems to indicate we're trying to build outside the development envelope, the association understands we are not trying to build outside the envelope. And it also talks about restoring native specimen trees. I believe Mr. Palladini now understands from everything that's gone on that no native specimen trees have been disturbed and need to be restored. So there's two things on that I just think is important. Ms. Petrovich said a lot of things and stated a lot of inaccuracies, and I want to address a couple. One thing that she said, and because it addresses something that I said, is that the pool design has not changed. The pool and spa and cabana site has not changed and design has not changed. She is correct, and if I misled, it was not intentional, that there was a concrete terrace proposed on the west side of the pool. The MBAR said no. We withdrew that as a request. I don't think that's a change in design of the pool and cabana, which is why I stated what I stated. But since Ms. Petrovich put into question my statement, I wanted to be absolutely clear with the commission as to what has occurred. Are there any questions? Okay. The drainage stuff that she referred to, and if you could bring back up the close. These squares here, and here, are seepage pits. They have nothing to do with the pool and cabana complex. In getting the land use permit granted, the flood control department had a concern given 100 years flood and given the storm in 1969. And they required, and it is going to be built before we can occupy, a flood diverter wall on the north boundary of the property. And Ms. Bradbury, if you could pull back up the full site plan, I'd appreciate it. That is this right here, this undulating wall is required by the flood control department. What that does is it takes all the water and dumps all the water coming down across the properties to our north into two areas, here and here. And although I'm shaking, I apologize for that. You can see the contour lines are designed to direct the water along the side of our property so that it does not spill into our neighbors' properties and to be collected by those seepage pits. It is not a concrete swale. It is just a contouring of the land. And that's why those seepage pits are there, and they would be there whether or not the pool is ultimately built or not. Yeah, and they were not mandated by the flood control department or planning. It was something that Mr. Easton put on the design as a way of protecting our neighbors from water flowing onto their property. The final thing I just want to stress is Ms. Petrovich on several occasions referred to repeated zoning violations. There was one zoning violation. One and one, only one. Yes, we apologize for it. Yes, we did not believe we were committing a zoning violation when it happened, but there was one. I just don't think rhetoric helps at this point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We are in deliberation. Commissioners. Anything to add? Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I intend to vote to support the staff recommendation and deny.
Okay, very good. Mr. Overall.
I can't make a finding that would justify making the map modification, so I will support the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Not yet. We're still
there
just...
may be more discussion.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I agree, Commissioner, overall. I think I'm going to move to vote to deny. I think the zoning violation has to be worked out first and the screening replaced, and then come back and we'll talk about modification. I think at that point, that would be the thing to do. I think it's premature with these issues outstanding. We can't make the findings with a zoning violation, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
I am not of that position, by the way. I can actually make the findings for denial of this map modification based on a number of other issues regarding the drainage, regarding the health of any, the potential health of any, of anything that gets planted there. There's a lot of issues for me, so, I mean, yes, the zoning violation needs to get resolved, but that's a whole separate issue here for me. This is a map modification that we're being asked to do, and I see absolutely no reason to grant a map modification just so the zoning violation can be taken, fixed, which is essentially what we're doing, so, I mean, it's just fix it. Get out there and fix it, with what you got on site. I personally do not believe that this is the appropriate place as far as site planning to put this pool with the constraints of that corner.
I agree.
I think I calculate that we've got about 7,000 square feet of lawn, open space. I think somewhere in there we could find a pool that would not interrupt the ability of Mr. Stone's children to play on the lawn. I mean, give me a break. You got 7,000 square feet. That's like twice the size of a football field. So, for me, that does come into play here. That, if this had come to us without all the zoning violations, my feelings would be, or my opinions would be exactly the same, that this was not appropriate place to try to squeeze in this pool and cabana, and we've got bad site planning, and we need to follow the community plan policies and protect the drainages and the native plants that we have. Like those trees. Those trees aren't going to, those oak trees aren't going to survive all of what's gone on, if we continue to impact their root zones like we have.
I agree with, am I on? I agree with Chairman Gottstanger's comments on the other issues. So how do we do this? Make a motion to
I'm looking for a
deny
motion.
and then address the other issues
No.
as recommendations to MBAR?
No, we're done.
We're done?
That's up to the applicant to figure out what they're going to do.
Commissioner Overall, are you prepared to move?
I move we accept staff's recommendation.
And I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Carries unanimously. I don't know.
No, because there's no application, there's nothing,
Yeah, I think we're on this map issue.
Mr. Chair, I think County Council would like you to slightly amend the findings.
I would.
So let's just take care of that.
And if your motion would include in it, the motion maker and the second agrees to add to finding 2.4 on the third line. I'm on page B1, findings. Third line, if you would say, have zoning requirements regarding oak tree and specimen tree protection, please. Add and specimen tree to that finding.
That is not in the...
It's not in the findings currently, and I think it would be a good idea to include it.
I recommend we modify the approved motion to include the language as proposed by Ms. Slutsky.
And I second the amendment to the motion.
All in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, folks.
we have one remaining item on your agenda, and I think we can take care of it fairly quickly if you'd like to do that
Let's do
before.
it. Okay. Good. Ms. Opelin, would you read the next item into the record, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me one moment.
I'm not recognizing you. We're on to something else. I'm sorry.
So you understand what we've done? You gave
I understand. Thank you.
It didn't exist before. You did. The avocado.
The hearing's over. Commissioner, let's move on.
The language that the county lawyer just obviously put in did something that you don't understand.
Well, would you read the next item in, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department that the Montecito Planning Commission consider and adopt a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that they adopt an ordinance, case number 09-ORD3, amending Division 35.2, Montecito zones and allowable land uses of, and make other revisions as necessary to Section 35-2 of the Santa Barbara County Montecito Land Use and Development Code of Chapter 35 zoning of the county code that would revise the existing procedures for permitting development located in designated environmentally sensitive habitat areas.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the Montecito Planning Commission. You may recall that in December of 2008, we were here before you with a workshop discussing the current status of the Montecito ESH zone and some of the deficiencies of that zone in its failure to regulate certain activities that could occur within designated ESH areas that would have the effect of not fulfilling the principles of the Montecito Community Plan regarding the protection of those areas, as well as the purpose and intent of the ESH overlay itself. We also discussed in that workshop how these deficiencies had been corrected in other areas of the county, specifically the Goleta ESH overlay and the Toro Canyon ESH overlay. Sorry. So we are here before you today to review the proposed ordinance amendment that would revise the permit process for activities occurring within designated ESH areas, and we hope that you will adopt the staff proposed recommendations and provide a recommendation to the board to do the same. So the recommendation by staff is to amend the development code as provided in your staff report to provide greater protection for the ESH areas in Montecito, similar to the other ESH overlay areas in the county. And doing this, or the way to do this, would be to include additional activities that would then be regulated within the ESH overlay areas. These regulated activities are as follows. The removal of native vegetation along 50 linear feet or more of creek bank, or additional removal that, when added to previous removal, exceeds the 50 linear feet threshold. Grading excess of 50 cubic yards of cut or fill. The removal of native vegetation over an area greater than 5,000 square feet, or again, when added to previous removal, would exceed the 5,000 square foot threshold. And there is an exemption proposed for this category that would allow for removal of vegetation for fuel management purposes that occurs within 100 feet of an existing structure. And I think we're all highly sensitive to that situation these days.
I'm done with my food.
Yeah, sometimes Mother Nature takes care of that for us. Continuing on with the proposed additional regulated activities would be the removal of native trees, and there are certain size specifications, and non-native trees that are used as habitat by monarch butterflies or for roosting or by nesting raptors. Unless either, and there are several outs to this particular category, including that the tree is dead or not of significant habitat value, that the tree prevents the construction of a project for which permits have been issued and project design is not feasible, the tree is diseased or poses a danger to other healthy trees in the immediate vicinity. And lastly, the tree is so weakened by age, disease, et cetera, as to cause imminent danger to persons or property. Also in this last category, there is the exception for fuel management for fire protection purposes within 100 feet of an existing structure. And lastly, under the additional regulated activities would be a new conditional use permit requirement for the removal of native vegetation in excess of 1 acre or 500 linear feet of creek bank where grading exceeds 1,500 cubic yards of cut and fill, and again, the exemption for fuel management purposes would apply to this CUP requirement as well. Again, these are pretty much modeled after the structure, at least, of the Goleta and Toro Canyon overlay zones. As was pointed out in the workshop, the distances and aerial allowances in the Toro Canyon are much higher than what was proposed for, or what is in effect for Goleta. And so, as I recall, the direction of your commission was to mirror it more on the Goleta, which I have done, which is currently contained in the proposed ordinance. The ordinance itself contains several other minor revisions that are required to clarify the existing language, as well as to accommodate the new permit requirements for the additional regulated activities. And that's the conclusion of my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Lange, thank you for that presentation. If you had drafted this with a longer look at, was it the Toro Canyon plan? What difference do you think would result to Montecito? Is it, are we sacrificing something by looking at a more, I suspect, urban model?
Mr. Chair, members of the commission, actually you would be adopting a more restrictive overlay than what Toro Canyon provides for. The Toro Canyon plan actually allows for distances and aerial removal in excess of what's being
Oh, it's the other way around?
Yes.
I see. The more rural Toro Canyon has a, I see.
That's correct.
Okay.
Michael, I've got my light on.
Yes. Commissioner Overall.
Mr. Langle, don't take this as a personal criticism. I think you had something difficult to work with, so let me make a comment, and I'd like your response to it. As I read this, and maybe it was the hour and the fatigue that I was feeling at the time, but I found this, the way it's written, to be very convoluted and difficult to follow because of the various number of permutations of what might be requested or required. And as I reflect back on what we were trying to do, if you had a clean slate to write something from the ground up, I think basically what we were saying is we've had problems in environmentally sensitive habitat. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to put in place an ordinance conditions that would protect any and require a level of review for any work that was to be proposed to be done in, around, or near the ESH. And as I read through this, it seems to me that there are, rather than the statement of that as a principle, and then requiring an application and a review on which you would then potentially impose in terms of making a judgment of what the next step is, you have, it seems to me that the requirements for 50 feet or, whatever it is, sets up a level of confusion. When you use the word native, I think it opens the door for people to say, after they've removed it, well, that wasn't native, but you still have disturbance in the ESH. So I think probably all the nuts and bolts of what we need to do are probably contained in here, but I think it's unclear, at least let me put it this way, for one of these commissioners, it was unclear enough that I would feel better if we had a statement of policy up front, and then a requirement for people, if you're going to do work in, around, or near the ESH, you have to apply. And then what the next step is, apply for a review. What the next step is would be dictated on how these different things apply to the particular work being proposed. Was that clear?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, overall, yes. And to some degree, because I was working within the confines of the existing ESH overlay that's already been adopted for Montecito, I tried to put in the new regulations in concert with that structure that already exists. So I was not starting with a clean slate. Another point is that the purpose and intent of that particular overlay, I think, lays out what it is that you're looking for as far as, why are we doing this, essentially? We have these ESH overlays, and then why are we regulating what goes on in and around those particular designated areas? Lastly, your point regarding native versus non-native and arguments that can occur, I understand that question, and that's one of the main points that the Montecito Association brought up in their letter, which is that if you are going into a designated ESH area and only removing, let's say, non-native species, sometimes that can be a good thing because you're taking out invasive species that could overtake the native species. For example, if you've got German ivy growing in an ESH area, you know what the effect that is. But at the same time, if that activity is not regulated, it can have the effect of damaging the ESH area overall because of soil disturbance, increased siltation into nearby creeks, things like that. And so I think staff would be comfortable in making the change that the Montecito Association is requesting, that we take out the word native and just do it in terms of any vegetation removal. The different levels, or the different numbers, 50 feet of removal along a creek bank, those things are meant to be just the threshold that if you're doing less than that, it's seen as a de minimis type project, does not need to have the protections in review. But if you're exceeding that, then it's going to have potential for impacts and needs to be reviewed. You can certainly suggest different thresholds or whatever you think is better as far as protecting the ESH zones within Montecito.
Just a comment. I don't want to take issue with the thresholds that are in what you drafted. I think that's just fine. What concerns me is when you have some of the measurements that we're talking about. Let's just talk for a moment about a wildlife corridor. You could have 50 feet of work done in a habitat, and it would break the corridor if it were in a narrow spot up a creek bottom or something. So what I'm concerned about is that it be very clear to the public that if you're going to do work in, around, or near ESH, you really need to have some kind of a review that makes this determination of what you're proposing doesn't cause problems. And frankly, in reading it, I didn't get that was a requirement. I thought it was more left up to the judgment of the applicant as to whether they met the requirements or didn't meet the requirements. As I said, I did admit to a degree of fatigue, so I may very well have missed it.
Director Black.
Mr. Chair, I think, many provisions in our ordinances rely on property owners and applicants making a determination. And what we always recommend is if you think you're close, come in and review it with us. And we grant exemptions for things all the time, so it's very clear we have reviewed. And I think a lot of people do that. But, when there's a threshold, we don't say, well, but if you're anywhere near an environmentally sensitive habitat site or a setback or anything else, you have to come in and talk to us about it. We don't say that, but that's, in fact, what a lot of people do.
Commissioner Burrows, comment? No. Commissioner Gottsnake? The leaving the homeowner to that interpretation is difficult. Well,
Mr. Chair, it's not an
Do you think
interpretation.
it's clear enough?
It's a threshold. And it's just, it's like a 6-foot-high wall. Well, we don't
Maybe
make
there
everybody
is a-
come in and tell us their wall's 5 feet 9 inches.
Mhm.
But if people think, well, a piece of my wall is a little bit over and most of it's under, they typically come in.
But don't you need a specialist to identify what's native and what isn't? I mean, I would have no clue at all. I've never even heard of German ivy until 2 seconds ago. I think I've seen it, but I don't know. How do, I mean, from a practical point of view, it's, and I think, is that the frustration you're feeling, that this is too hard to do, or properly?
I think my concern
Go ahead, Director.
is that maybe it's not absolutely clear what we're trying to do, but in the interest of moving forward, let's try it and see what happens. I would say let's delete the word native, so that's not left to interpretation. Let's adopt it, and if we have problems a year, 2 down the road, we can always revisit it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm willing to accept that, but I wanted to go on record for it. To me, this doesn't read as clearly as I think you would have drafted had you started with a clean slate. So.
Any other questions? Ms. Black?
Mr. Chair, just for clarification purposes, I think the only place I would recommend that we not delete native is in the discussion of trees, because that was very intentional, that protection of native trees be treated in a different way. Native vegetation along a creek corridor or environmentally sensitive habitat area is less an important distinction, but the trees is I think, an important distinction.
I mean, I would agree with Ms. Black on that, because ultimately, we only have a few native trees.
Yeah, do we have a list? I mean,
Well,
what they are?
there are oak trees,
Oak
there are
trees.
sycamore trees, there are bay trees, and maybe a couple of more that I can't think of off the top of my head. We don't have a lot of native trees that we're trying to protect. The issue becomes, and I think we saw it in the last case, is how do you define specimen trees? But that's not the issue that we're dealing with here. We're dealing with native trees. And I don't know, maybe, I mean, there really aren't that many,
But we're also dealing with creek bank degradation. And again, it doesn't matter to that bank whether it's a native tree or not. So I guess I need to read where.
I know, but what we're talking about here is an environmentally sensitive habitat area.
Already.
It's already defined.
Defined, right.
And it's environmentally sensitive because it has native trees and some native vegetation and a whole lot of non-native vegetation, that some people may think is native and some people may not. So I can see with taking the native out of the vegetation, but not out of the tree. I think Ms. Black is accurate. We have to, I mean, our whole community plan, as far as the biology section, which is one of the biggest section in the plan, is all about protecting our native trees and our oaks, which we just spent, 2 hours on a previous project. So, we need to get clear as to what we're trying to cause here, for both the applicant and the community. And it's the protection of our environmentally sensitive habitats.
Okay, Ms. Burrows?
I'm ready to make a motion on this if we're there.
Yeah. Let's open this up to public comment. Mr. Palladini, you have a slip in?
Yes, I do. Thank you again. You have a letter dated March 19th, which was referred to by Mr. Langle, and I believe Mr. Overall, or someone did. We initiated this thing because it was a concern we had. We brought it up, and we want to thank staff again and yourselves for moving this forward. I think it's a very important issue, and we feel that this is a really good first step, and maybe we need to give it a little time to kind of sort itself out. It probably is not totally foolproof. The concern, as we stated in the, we kind of struggle with rewriting this paragraph, but our concern on seeing the staff report was that it's probably, we would prefer, and it seems to be the consensus, that if the vegetation is in an ESH, it is there, and not leave it up to someone to decide if it's native or otherwise, because if you define that as native vegetation, I think it would actually encourage the removal of vegetation in a creek, because people would say, oh, we can clean all that out of there because none of it's native. So, and the other thing is, my son's a bird biologist, and his opinion is that, first, most ESHs in Montecito are all, I think it's fair to say, all ESH areas in Montecito have non-native species now growing in them and have had for many, many years. And they have actually become part of the habitat in themselves for various types of wildlife, and particularly birds. So, and the other thing that they do very effectively, whether it's pittosporum or a native, is they do hold the soil and provide good water retention in watersheds. So I think it's important to just leave that as vegetation in ESH watershed, in ESH areas. Okay?
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Palladini. Ms. Petrovich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. I'm going to be the lone voice in the wilderness here because I am very concerned about the invasive species that I've been seeing more and more along our creeks. The German ivy is only one example. I mean, this arundo that seems to be spreading throughout the south coast. It's that big cane-like stuff. It looks almost like sugar cane. It spreads like wildfire. It pushes out the natives. It clogs the creeks. It is not desirable. I mean, Fish and Game has a program ongoing to try to eradicate it. It spreads so fast, and it is so disruptive to our native corridors. The nasturtium in many areas, creates habitat for rats and other rodents, but it actually eliminates a lot of bird habitat. So I would suggest that if you're going to take out the word non-native, and I understand fully why you'd want to preserve most non-natives, but we have some invasive species that I don't think you want to encourage, and I think you don't want to discourage people from removing those. But frankly, if I had to go through this kind of permitting process, I wouldn't bother. It is a pain. It's expensive and it's time consuming. Diane's sitting there nodding, and so if you're going to take that word out, then I think that you need to make it very clear that this does not in any way proscribe removal of invasive non-natives or require permitting. Yeah. Right. I think that's really important. Otherwise, people have no incentive to control these invasives, and they'll just keep going. And I know you don't know what they are, but landscape architects know, and the people who really care about the creek know, and those are the people who will be doing the removal, and we want to encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you. Deliberation? Any comments?
Have we clarified the wording on this?
It's
Mr.
two ways.
Chair,
You can look at it
I think you have to pick one way or the other. I think if you try to add non-native invasives, you're setting up another debate about, what's considered an invasive species and how can it be removed and still not disturb the habitat. I mean, I certainly understand Ms. Petrovich's point, and I think if your commission is swayed by the argument, then I would just leave the language as native. If you're not swayed by it, then I would just strike the word native. I don't think we can do something in between.
If we strike native and Ms. Petrovich comes in and wants to clear non-native invasive species, would that be permissible?
With a permit.
With a permit.
right now you would not have to, she would not be required to obtain a permit.
You don't
That's the
want
point.
me clearing anything without a permit.
But that,
Good Lord.
Mr. Chair, that's the point.
And, Mr. Chair, let me just add that this would only apply within the designated ESH overlays. So, Ms. Petrovich, if her property does not contain an ESH overlay, can clear as much German ivy as she wants to without having to come in and see us.
Ms. Burrows.
I'm wondering if our council has any comments on the specific language and what would be preferred legally.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Burrows, this is really a policy issue.
You've already gotten us in trouble.
Well, it's your job. All right. I recommend that we go with staff's recommendation, and then, as stated, leaving native in the document, is that what you're recommending?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Gottstinker, if you're suggesting we keep the language as it was presented to you, yes, it would be.
Yeah, that's what
retaining
I'm
the word
suggesting,
native. Just a point, Mr. Chair. It certainly would afford more protection than currently exists.
Yeah, that's kind of where
Even with the changes, even without the.
Correct.
Well, I guess I can support that, and we'll hopefully continue to look at this as things go on. There is a good argument that any removal is destabilizing, and we have morphed away from native species, and birds do acclimate and rely on these non-native things, but this is well over my head. Mr. Overall.
I think as we've experienced on other issues, sometimes it warrants a review of really what we're talking about, and I just did the math on it. In terms of the area that we're talking about, for all practical purposes, we're talking about something, let's say, 50 feet long by 100 feet wide. So that gives you, from a dimensional standpoint, what is that correct?
Mr. Chair, I think it depends on which provision you're speaking to. It can simply be 50 linear feet of removal along a creek, and the width is really inconsequential. If it's a native or vegetation area that's not in a creek, then I think you're right. It's roughly 50 by 100.
And, Mr. Chair, the other thing I would offer is that there actually may be coming down the pike some recommendations that Kevin Wallace and I and have been working on around fire clearance. And there's a lot of information, because we've done this as this exemption so that actually fire clearance can happen. And there's a lot of new information coming out about wildfires, that sometimes actually vegetation will actually protect homes. And that's come out from San Diego and a couple of other areas. So, this whole thing, may get revisited sooner than later as far as the clearing that fire departments, which is the exemption that we've given in here, is okay if you clear, that 100-foot exemption is so fire department clearance. And there's just so much new information that I think we just go with what's been presented. In 6 months from now, we may want to look at this again,
Okay.
Because there may be there's a number of things that might change in 6 months to a year.
Any other discussion? A motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion to approve and second?
I second.
2 seconds, even better. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Langle. Okay. Motion to adjourn. Yeah. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
Jack and Mike, oops.